Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere so cold that your eyelashes freeze together when you blink, where the air itself seems to crackle with ice crystals, and where the locals casually sip melted animal fat like it's a morning latte. We're talking about Yakutia, officially the Sakha Republic, a region in eastern Siberia where winter temperatures regularly plummet to minus 71 degrees Celsius. That's minus 96 Fahrenheit for my American friends trying to do the math through their cozy blankets right now. This isn't just cold. This is the kind of cold that makes Antarctica look like a beach vacation. You probably won't survive this, honestly, but let's pretend you will. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I love seeing the global bedtime roll call. Are you in California at 11 p.m.? Sydney at 4 in the afternoon? London pulling an all-nighter? Let me know. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step off the small propeller plane onto a runway that's essentially a strip of packed ice, and the cold hits you like a physical wall. It's late January, deep in the polar night, and the sun hasn't shown its face here in weeks. Won't for weeks more either. The darkness isn't just an absence of light. It's a presence, thick and suffocating, broken only by the pale glow of stars so bright they look close enough to touch. The air temperature reads minus 68 Celsius on the small digital thermometer by the airport entrance, and you haven't even experienced the record lows yet. Those come in February. Your lungs seize on that first breath. The cold doesn't just chill the air. It transforms it into something sharp, something that stabs at the inside of your chest like tiny frozen needles. You instinctively cover your mouth with your scarf, but within 30 seconds the moisture from your breath has turned the fabric into a stiff, frost-covered board against your face. Your nose hairs freeze solid, not like metaphorically freeze, literally freeze into tiny ice spikes inside your nostrils. It's the strangest sensation, like having delicate icicles growing inward with each breath. Welcome to Oymyakon, one of the coldest permanently inhabited places on Earth. The name allegedly comes from the Yakut word kiam, meaning unfrozen water, referring to a nearby hot spring. Oh, the irony. This village of about 500 hardy souls holds the record for the coldest temperature ever recorded in an inhabited location. Minus 71.2 degrees Celsius, logged back in 1924. Though locals will tell you, with that characteristic Yakutian understatement, that it's gotten colder since then, the thermometers just weren't capable of registering it. When your measuring equipment literally freezes and stops working, you know you're in a special kind of hell. Your guide, a compact man named Mikhail who seems to be composed entirely of fur and weathered leather, grunts something in Yakut and gestures toward a vehicle. It's a UAZ, a Russian utility van that looks like it was designed by someone who'd only heard vehicles described secondhand and decided that warm and comfortable were optional features. The engine is running. It's been running since yesterday, Mikhail explains in broken English. You don't turn engines off here in winter. If you do, the oil turns to sludge, the antifreeze becomes a cruel joke, and the battery dies faster than your chances of getting a taxi in this weather. Which is to say, instantly. The door handle burns your hand even through your glove. Not with heat, with cold. The metal is so far below zero that touching it creates that same searing sensation as touching something hot. Your body can't really tell the difference at the extremes. Pain is pain. Mikhail barks at you in Russian, and you realize you've just committed your first potentially fatal mistake. Skin on metal at these temperatures? They bond. Instant frostbite. You could leave actual flesh behind if you're not careful. Everything here wants to kill you, you're starting to realize, even the inanimate objects. Inside the van, it's maybe minus 20, which feels tropical by comparison. Your body doesn't know whether to shiver or relax. The windows are covered in intricate frost patterns on the inside, ice flowers blooming across the glass in fractal perfection. They're beautiful, sure, but they also mean you can't see outside. Not that there's much to see. Just darkness punctuated by the occasional light from a building, each one a small fortress against the cold. The village appears gradually as your eyes adjust. Low buildings, mostly wooden, squat close to the frozen ground as if trying to minimize their exposure to the elements. Smoke pours from every chimney, thick, white columns that freeze into ice fog almost immediately, creating a perpetual mist that hangs over the settlement. This ice fog, called pakadneum gla locally, is its own hazard. Visibility drops to a few meters. The suspended ice crystals catch in your lungs. Everything takes on a dreamlike, suffocated quality. Historians still argue whether humans were actually meant to survive in places like this, or whether the Yakut people represent some kind of beautiful, stubborn mistake in the annals of human migration. The indigenous Saka arrived in this region sometime around the 13th or 14th century, moving north from the area around Lake Baikal. Why? Theories vary. Some say they were fleeing conflicts with the Mongols. Others suggest they were following herds, pursuing that nomadic imperative that's driven humans to colonize every corner of the planet, no matter how inhospitable. Either way, they found themselves in a land where winter lasts 9 months and the temperature range between summer and winter can span more than 100 degrees Celsius. And they decided, yeah, this works. Your destination is a traditional Yakut home, though Mikhail calls it a balagan, a term that'll become very important to you soon. From the outside, it looks like a small wooden box, maybe 5 meters by 6 meters, sitting on stilts about a meter off the ground. The stilts aren't for flooding. There's no water here, just permafrost extending down hundreds of meters. No, the stilts are to prevent your home's heat from melting the ground beneath it, which would cause the whole structure to sink into the mud that would form and then refreeze into an uneven, unstable mess. Building on permafrost is its own engineering nightmare. The entrance is through a sort of airlock system, 2 doors separated by a tiny chamber. You never, ever open both doors at once. That would let the cold in and the heat out, and recovering from that kind of thermal loss could take hours. The fuel to generate that lost heat, precious beyond measure. Inside the first door, you're hit with a wall of not exactly warmth, but less cold. Maybe -5 Celsius in the entrance chamber. Your glasses, if you wore them, would frost over immediately from the temperature differential. Through the second door, and now you're in the main living space. It's dark except for the glow from a massive wood stove that dominates the center of the room. A beast of cast iron and fire brick that's clearly the heart of this household. The temperature here hovers around 15 degrees Celsius, about 60 Fahrenheit. Barely room temperature by most standards, but after the outside, it feels like a sauna. You start to sweat under your layers. An elderly woman, Mikhail's mother, sits near the stove, working on some kind of hide with a curved blade. She doesn't look up, just continues her rhythmic scraping. The hide is frozen stiff despite being indoors. She's softening it through mechanical action and what little warmth the stove provides. This is Sardana, and she's lived through 83 winters here. 83. Let that sink in as you drift towards sleep. 83 times watching the temperature drop below -60. 83 times surviving when every biological instinct says humans shouldn't. On a low table near the wall, you notice a pot of something pale and greasy looking. The solid, this weird yellowish-white substance that looks like a very unappetizing wax candle. Mikhail follows your gaze and grins, the first expression you've seen crack his weathered face. Horse fat, he says simply. For drinking. He sees your confusion and adds, water freeze in stomach, make you colder. Fat stay liquid, keep you warm from inside. He mimes sipping from a cup, and you feel your stomach turn slightly. This is going to be your life for the next few months. You've committed to understanding how people survive in what is arguably the most hostile, continuously inhabited environment on Earth. Not a research station in Antarctica where you can call for evacuation. Not a temporary camp. This is home for these people. Babies are born here. Children play here. Life, somehow, continues at temperatures where carbon dioxide can freeze solid, where thrown boiling water crystallizes before it hits the ground, where steel shatters like glass if you hit it too hard. The light from the stove flickers across the wooden walls, which are thick, maybe 20 centimeters of solid logs, with another layer beyond that, and dried moss or deer hair packed between them for insulation. The ceiling is low, maybe 2 meters high, to minimize the volume of air that needs heating. Every design choice in this structure is about heat retention. The window, singular, there's only one, is tiny, maybe 30 centimeters square, with quadruple glazing that's still covered in frost patterns. Natural light is a luxury you can't afford when it means thermal loss. Your body is starting to understand the reality of your situation now. The shivering begins. Not the gentle shiver of being a bit chilly, but violent whole-body tremors that you can't control. Your muscles are burning calories to generate heat, and they're going to keep doing that for months. The average person here consumes somewhere between 4,000 and 6,000 calories a day in winter. You're going to be hungry constantly. That fat on the table, you're going to learn to love it, crave it even. Your body is going to rewire itself to see lipids as survival itself. Sardana finally looks up at you and says something in Yakut to Mikhail. He translates. Grandmother says your face is already starting to freeze. Come closer to stove. You hadn't noticed, but touching your cheek, you feel that telltale numbness, the wooden sensation of skin that's getting too cold. You've been inside for maybe 5 minutes and you're still at risk. The cold here doesn't care about walls and doors. It's patient. It's persistent. It seeps in through every crack, every gap, every moment of inattention. This is stage 1 of your survival education. Understanding that the cold here isn't just weather. It's an active antagonist, a constant presence that will exploit every mistake, every moment of weakness. The Yakut people have developed a culture entirely around negotiating with this antagonist, developing strategies and traditions that date back centuries. You're about to get a crash course in all of them because the alternative is becoming a cautionary tale, another foreign fool who thought they could tough it out and ended up with blackened fingers and toes, or worse, a frozen corpse that won't even decompose until spring. Outside, the thermometer continues its slow descent. -70 tonight, Mikhail says casually, like he's commenting on a light drizzle. You watch him scoop a small ladle of that rendered fat, now warmed to liquid by sitting near the stove, and take a long sip like it's tea. He sees you watching and offers the ladle. You drink, he says. It's not really a suggestion. You need fat. You need calories. You need stay conscious. That last part sounds ominous, but you're too overwhelmed to question it right now. You take the ladle. The fat is warm, slick, and tastes like liquid animal. There's no other way to describe it. It's not pleasant, but it's not as horrible as you'd feared. Mostly it's just oily, coating your mouth and throat as it goes down, leaving a film that you can feel. Your stomach doesn't quite know what to make of it, but there's an immediate sensation of warmth spreading through your core. Maybe it's psychological. Maybe it's physiological. Probably both. The people here have known for generations what science is only now confirming. Liquid fats consumed in extreme cold provide immediate usable energy and don't lower your core temperature the way cold water does. Welcome to Yakutia. Welcome to the deep freeze. Welcome to the place where survival is a full-time job and every single day is a negotiation with extinction. You've got a long winter ahead of you. I need to continue writing to reach the 3,000 to 3,500 word target for Section 1. You settle onto a low bench near the stove, still wearing most of your layers because 15 degrees Celsius really isn't warm enough to strip down. Sardana has gone back to her hide scraping, that rhythmic scritch-scritch sound providing a meditative backdrop to the crackling of burning wood. The stove needs feeding constantly, you're learning. Mikhail opens the iron door and tosses in 2 more split logs, and you see the fire inside isn't the cheerful orange campfire flame you're used to. It's a fierce, almost white-hot blaze designed to extract every possible calorie from the wood. Nothing is wasted here. The fuel itself is precious. Trees grow slowly this far north, stunted by the short growing season and the permafrost that limits how deep roots can penetrate. Most of the wood comes from larch, the only conifer that drops its needles in winter, one of the few trees that can tolerate having its roots frozen solid for 9 months of the year. The wood is dense, resinous, and burns hot, but it takes a lot of it to get through a winter. Families start stockpiling in summer, cutting and stacking cords upon cords in preparation for the dark months. Run out of wood and you die. It's that simple. You notice that despite the stove's heat, your feet are still cold. The temperature stratifies dramatically inside these homes. It might be 15 degrees at head height when you're sitting, but near the floor it's probably close to freezing. Heat rises, and with the low ceilings there's only so far it can go before it's trapped against the roof, which is itself barely insulated compared to the walls. People here sleep in positions that would seem bizarre to outsiders, curled tightly, often with their heads toward the stove even if it means sleeping almost sitting up. Straightening out, letting your extremities extend into the colder air layers, is an invitation to frostbite even indoors. A quirky piece of Yakut tradition. During the absolute coldest nights, families would sometimes sleep in shifts, with one person staying awake to tend the fire. Let it die even for an hour or two, and the indoor temperature could plummet to dangerous levels. This wasn't just about comfort, it was about survival. There are documented cases of entire families freezing to death in their sleep when fires went out during particularly brutal cold snaps. Modern amenities have changed this somewhat. Some homes now have continuous burn stoves with larger fireboxes, and a few even have diesel generators for backup heat. But the old knowledge persists. The fire is life. Respect the fire. Mikhail brings you a cup of something dark and steaming. Chai, he says. Tea. But this isn't like any tea you've had before. It's thick, almost syrupy, and when you take a sip you taste not just tea leaves but butter, salt, and milk. This is sutitsai, a traditional beverage that's more soup than tea, designed to deliver calories along with warmth. The butter, probably from a cow though it could be from a reindeer or horse, floats on top in golden globules. It's actually not bad. Certainly better than straight horse fat, though you're learning not to be picky. Your body is already starting to understand that calories equal survival, and the normal peacetime pickiness about food is a luxury that has no place here. Outside, you hear a sound like a gunshot. You flinch, but Mikhail doesn't even look up. Trees, he explains. Sap freeze, expand. Tree explode from inside. You process this. It's so cold outside that trees are literally detonating from frozen moisture expanding within their trunks. The sound comes again. Crack! Somewhere in the distance, sharp and violent against the otherwise muffled silence of the frozen landscape. The ice fog dampened sound makes everything feel close and distant at once. It's disorienting, this sensory deprivation punctuated by random explosions of freezing wood. Your mind drifts to the people who first mapped this region for the Russian Empire, explorers and exiles who came here in the 17th and 18th centuries. Many didn't survive their first winter. The native Yakut, by contrast, had already developed a complete survival technology. Not just techniques, but an entire cultural framework for thriving in these conditions. They'd figured out the fat consumption, the layered clothing, the architectural tricks, the psychological strategies for enduring the polar night. When the Russians arrived with their superior European methods, they froze while the locals watched with what must have been a mixture of pity and bemusement. You're getting drowsy now. The warmth of the tea and the hypnotic flicker of firelight working their magic. Mikhail shows you to your sleeping area, a raised platform near the stove, covered in reindeer hides and felt blankets. Sleep with clothes, he advises. Not all clothes, but many. Too naked, too cold. Too much clothes, you sweat. Sweat freeze, you die. There's a delicate balance to everything here, you're realizing. Too much, too little, both will kill you. Survival lives in the narrow middle ground. As you arrange yourself on the sleeping platform, still wearing your thermal base layers and a sweater, covered in more furs than you can count, you think about tomorrow. About learning to live in a place where stepping outside inadequately dressed means frostbite in 90 seconds and death in perhaps 20 minutes. Where your survival depends on millennia of accumulated knowledge that you're going to have to absorb as quickly as possible. Where people sip melted fat to stay conscious because their bodies are burning fuel at an extraordinary rate just to maintain basic function. The stove crackles. Sardana murmurs something to Mikhail in Yakut. Outside, another tree explodes in the frozen night, and you drift towards sleep, knowing that your real education begins tomorrow, when you step back out into the -70 cold and learn what it really means to survive at the edge of human endurance. You wake to the sound of Mikhail feeding the stove, the clang of the iron door somehow both jarring and comforting. Your first conscious thought is that you're cold, not dangerously so, but your nose and the tips of your ears have that aching numbness that means they spent the night in air colder than your body wanted. Your second thought is that you need to pee, and you immediately dread what that's going to entail in this environment. Spoiler alert, It's going to be an experience. But before we get to the glamorous details of waste elimination at -70, let's talk about what's happening inside your body right now, because it's waging a war you're barely aware of. A complex, desperate, biological battle against the cold that's been running all night while you slept, burning through calories at a rate that would horrify your normal weather self. Your core temperature, that sacred 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius that your body guards more jealously than a dragon guards gold, is under constant assault. Every single breath you take brings in air that's dozens of degrees below freezing, and your respiratory system has to warm it before it reaches your lungs. This isn't optional. You can't breathe -70 air directly into your lungs without causing serious damage. So your nasal passages, your sinuses, your throat, they're all working overtime, pulling heat from your blood to warm each inhale to something approaching body temperature. This process alone burns a shocking number of calories. Researchers studying Arctic survival have found that just breathing cold air can increase your metabolic rate by 15 to 20%. That's before you factor in any physical activity, any shivering, any of the other thermal demands on your system. You're literally burning energy to process air, and there's nothing you can do about it except keep breathing and keep eating to replace those lost calories. Then there's the shivering. You probably noticed it before you fell asleep, those uncontrollable tremors that seized your muscles every few minutes. That's your body's first line of active defense against cold. Shivering is just rapid muscle contraction, and like any muscle activity, it generates heat. Lots of heat, actually. Vigorous shivering can increase your heat production by up to 5 times your resting metabolic rate. It's extraordinarily effective in the short term. But here's the catch. Shivering is expensive. It burns through glycogen stores, the quick access sugar your muscles keep on hand for immediate energy, at an alarming rate. Once those stores are depleted, your body starts breaking down fat and eventually protein for fuel. This is why the Yakut diet is so outrageously calorie-dense. It's not indulgence. It's mathematics. Your body needs fuel constantly or it starts consuming itself. Run out of fuel and the shivering stops. And when the shivering stops, you're in serious trouble. The cessation of shivering isn't a good sign, by the way. It's not your body deciding you're warm enough. It's your body running out of resources to burn, entering the early stages of hypothermia. This is when people start feeling sleepy, peaceful even. It's when they make fatal decisions, like sitting down to rest in the snow or taking off their clothes because they feel paradoxically hot. A phenomenon called paradoxical undressing that's killed countless cold exposure victims. Your brain, deprived of adequate warmth and fuel, starts malfunctioning in ways that feel pleasant but lead directly to death. But let's assume you're keeping ahead of the curve, eating enough, staying warm enough. Your body has other tricks up its evolutionary sleeve. One of the most fascinating is peripheral vasoconstriction. Your blood vessels in your extremities literally narrow, reducing blood flow to your fingers, toes, ears, and nose. This seems counterintuitive, right? Those are the parts getting coldest. Shouldn't you be sending more blood there? But your body is playing a ruthless game of triage. It's sacrificing the extremities to protect the core. Your brain, your heart, your lungs, your major organs, these are what matter for immediate survival. Your fingers? Sorry, but from your body's perspective, they're expendable. So blood flow to them decreases, which means less heat delivery, which means they get colder faster. This is why frostbite almost always hits the extremities first. Your own body has decided there are acceptable losses in the fight to keep your core temperature up. There's a cruel irony here that the Yakut people understand intimately. The colder it gets, the more your body restricts peripheral blood flow. But restricted blood flow means reduced dexterity, slower reactions, numbness. Try to do delicate work with your hands, sewing, fire starting, tool repair, and you'll struggle. But you need to do those tasks to survive. So you're caught in this terrible feedback loop where the cold makes you less capable of executing the precise actions you need to protect yourself from the cold. The solution: intermittent rewarming. The Yakut have developed elaborate hand-warming techniques, constantly cycling their hands between work and warmth. You'll see people pausing every few minutes to tuck their hands into their armpits or against the warm skin of their torso, restoring blood flow and sensation before returning to their task. It looks inefficient to outsiders, but it's the only way to maintain both core temperature and functional extremities. Historians still argue whether human populations in extreme cold environments show actual physiological adaptations or whether it's purely cultural technological adaptation. Some studies suggest that indigenous Arctic populations have slightly higher basal metabolic rates. They burn more calories at rest, generating more heat. Others show increased brown adipose tissue, a special type of fat that's particularly good at thermogenesis, heat generation. But the evidence is mixed, and the adaptations, if they exist, are subtle. Mostly, it's culture and technology keeping people alive, not evolution. Your face is another battleground. Exposed facial skin loses heat faster than almost any other body part because it has such a high surface area to volume ratio and because you can't really insulate it without suffocating. The Yakut solution is the bashlook, a hood arrangement that covers everything but your eyes, with a breathing hole that's usually covered by several layers of fur or fabric. But even breathing through this creates problems. Remember that moisture from your breath? It freezes instantly, building up layer upon layer of ice on the fabric, covering your mouth until you're essentially wearing an ice mask that conducts cold directly to your skin. You have to periodically break off these ice accumulations, which means exposing your face to do it, which means more frostbite risk. It's another one of those maddening catch-22s that define extreme cold survival. Every solution creates a new problem. You can't win, you can only manage the rate at which you're losing. Let's talk about what happens when you actually get frostbite, because you're almost certainly going to experience it at some level during your time here. Progresses in stages, each more serious than the last. First-degree frostbite, or frostnip, is superficial. Your skin turns pale or red, feels numb, might sting or burn when you rewarm it. Painful, unpleasant, but not tissue damaging if you catch it quickly. This is going to be your constant companion. That warning tingle in your cheeks, your nose, your fingers telling you to seek warmth now. Second-degree frostbite is where things get serious. Ice crystals form in your skin cells, and when they freeze, they expand, rupturing cell membranes. Upon rewarming, you get blisters filled with clear or milky fluid. The tissue is damaged but might recover fully with proper care. Or you might be left with permanent sensitivity to cold, chronic pain, or altered pigmentation. This is the level you want to avoid at all costs, and it's easier to slip into than you'd think. Just a few extra minutes of exposure during a whiteout or while dealing with an emergency, and you're there. Third-degree frostbite? That's when the freezing goes deep into the subcutaneous tissues, maybe even reaching muscle and bone. The affected area goes waxy, hard, and white or grayish yellow. You lose all sensation. Upon thawing, which should only be done by medical professionals if at all possible, the tissue turns black as it dies. This is when you start talking about amputations. This is what claimed the fingers and toes of countless explorers and unlucky Yakut hunters caught in unexpected weather. Your body's fluid balance is another weird casualty of extreme cold. You'd think you wouldn't sweat much, right? Wrong. All that layered clothing, all that metabolic heat generation from burning calories, you sweat. Not profusely, but enough. And in dry, cold air, you also lose moisture through respiration at an increased rate. So you're dehydrating constantly, even though you're surrounded by water in its solid form. But here's where it gets tricky. Drinking that frozen water creates its own problems. Remember what Mikhail told you about water freezing in your stomach? He wasn't entirely wrong. While water won't literally freeze solid in your stomach, your core temperature prevents that. Consuming ice-cold water or snow does lower your core temperature significantly because your body has to spend energy heating it to body temperature. Eating snow is one of the classic blunders of cold weather survival. Each gram of ice requires about 80 calories to melt, and then more energy to warm that melt water to body temperature. Do this enough, and you can induce hypothermia from the inside. This is why that rendered fat is so crucial. Fats are calorie-dense. 9 calories per gram versus 4 for carbohydrates or protein. They're also liquid at body temperature but stay relatively viscous even when cooled, so they don't create the same thermal shock as cold water. Drinking warm fat, horse, reindeer, seal in coastal areas, delivers energy and hydration without the dangerous temperature drop. It's brilliant, really, once you get past the psychological hurdle of consuming what's essentially a cup of melted lard. The Yakut also figured out that you can't just drink the fat straight, or at least you shouldn't. Too much at once can overwhelm your digestive system, which is already working overtime in the cold. They mix it with tea, add it to soups, incorporate it into virtually every meal in smaller doses throughout the day. Constant fueling, like stoking a fire. Let the fire die down too much, and it's hard to get it roaring again. Your brain is burning fuel too, by the way, probably more than usual. Cognitive function in extreme cold requires extra effort. Your neurons are trying to fire across synapses while your overall body temperature is under threat, and maintaining consciousness and rational decision-making takes energy. This is why confusion and poor judgment are early signs of hypothermia. The brain is literally running out of fuel to function properly. That fat you're drinking? Some of it is going straight to keeping your thoughts coherent enough to remember to keep drinking fat. Circular but effective. Mikhail appears with breakfast. A bowl of something called salamat, which is essentially flour fried in butter or fat until it forms a thick paste, then mixed with milk or cream. It looks like lumpy porridge and tastes intensely rich, almost overwhelmingly so. Your normal temperature palate would probably find it nauseating, but your cold-adapted body, even after just one night, craves it desperately. You eat the entire bowl, scraping the sides for every last calorie, and you're still hungry. Mikhail nods approvingly. Good, he says. You learn fast. Hungry is good. Means body working. You finally have to address the bathroom situation. There's an outhouse, of course there is, because indoor plumbing in permafrost is a nightmare of engineering. Pipes freeze solid unless they're constantly heated, and heating them takes energy you can't spare. So you bundle up, steel yourself, and head outside for the first time since arriving. The cold slams into you with renewed violence. Somehow you'd forgotten, in the relative comfort of the house, just how hostile the outside world is. Your first breath through your nose sends ice crystals scraping down your throat. Your eyes start to water, and those tears freeze on your eyelashes immediately, trying to glue your eyes shut. You have maybe 90 seconds before exposed skin starts to freeze, and you need to make this quick. The outhouse is 30 meters from the main house, close enough to reach quickly, far enough that the smell isn't a problem. Not that there's much smell. Everything freezes solid almost immediately. This is its own blessing and curse. No odor, but also no decomposition. Come spring, someone has to deal with the accumulated winter waste all thawing at once. You file this under problems for future you, and focus on the immediate task. Inside the outhouse, it's maybe -60 instead of -70. Improvement. You do what you need to do as quickly as humanly possible, and you learn a valuable lesson about how certain body parts react extremely poorly to cold exposure. The Yakut children learn this young. You're getting a crash course in adulthood. Some knowledge really does have to be experienced to be understood. Back inside, you're shivering violently again, your body screaming at you for that unnecessary cold exposure. Mikhail hands you more tea, more fat. Every time you go out, you must eat after, he explains. Replace the burn. You're starting to understand the rhythm of life here. It's all about energy management, expenditure and replacement, heat loss and heat generation, endless cycling between the barely warm house and the lethally cold outside. Your fingers are white and numb. Sardana takes one look and shakes her head, pulling your hands to the stove, but not too close. Rapid rewarming can cause tissue damage. She holds them at a distance where you can feel warmth but not heat, gradually allowing blood flow to return. The pain, when sensation comes back, is extraordinary. Burning, stabbing, throbbing all at once. You've experienced mild frostbite, first degree, from a 90-second trip to the outhouse. This is going to be a long winter. The cup sits on the wooden table, steam rising lazily in the cold air of the room. Except it's not really steam. It's water vapor that's immediately condensing and starting to freeze into tiny ice crystals, creating this ethereal fog that hovers above the liquid. And the liquid itself is what holds your attention. Rendered horse fat, melted to a consistency somewhere between olive oil and motor oil, with that pale golden color that doesn't quite look like anything you'd voluntarily put in your mouth. But here you are, voluntarily putting it in your mouth because the alternative is a lot worse than the taste. Mikhail has decided that today is the day you learn about fat. Not just how to consume it, but why it's the difference between functioning and freezing, between staying conscious and slipping into that dangerous hypothermic fog where your brain stops making good decisions. Water is enemy in cold, he says, pouring himself a cup from the pot that lives permanently near the stove. Everyone thinks, I am thirsty, I drink water. But water. He makes a gesture like something heavy dropping. Pulls heat from your body, makes you cold from inside. He's not wrong, and there's actual science backing this up, though the Yakut people figured it out through generations of trial and error long before anyone had thermometers sensitive enough to measure the effect. When you consume ice-cold water, and everything here is ice-cold unless you're actively heating it, your stomach and intestines have to expend significant energy warming it to body temperature. We're talking about raising water from -20 or -30 Celsius up to 37 Celsius. That's a temperature difference of 50 to 70 degrees, and every degree requires energy. Energy that comes from your already taxed metabolic system. The math is actually kind of horrifying when you work it out. 1 liter of water at -20 Celsius needs roughly 20,000 calories to melt and warm to body temperature. Not food calories, the capital C calories you count on nutrition labels, which are actually kilocalories, but straight thermodynamic calories. That translates to about 20 kilocalories, or 20 food calories. Doesn't sound like much until you realize you're drinking multiple liters per day to stay hydrated, and suddenly you're spending 100 to 200 calories just warming water inside your body. Calories you desperately need for other survival functions. Fat, though? Fat is different. Animal fats melt at temperatures just below body temperature. Horse fat liquefies around 30 to 35 Celsius. Reindeer fat is similar. This means when you consume warm liquid fat, it stays liquid as it cools to body temperature. It doesn't require that massive energy input to warm up because it's already warm. You're drinking it at 50 or 60 Celsius, and your body only has to cool it down slightly, which actually generates heat rather than consuming it. It's thermodynamically elegant in a way that makes you appreciate the sheer cleverness of traditional Arctic survival strategies. Plus, there's the caloric density we talked about earlier. 9 calories per gram of fat versus 0 calories in water. You're not just avoiding the thermal cost, you're actually delivering usable energy. A cup of rendered horse fat, maybe 200 milliliters, contains roughly 180 grams of fat. That's 1,600 calories. 1,600. That's more than half the daily caloric intake for a sedentary person in a temperate climate, delivered in one somewhat nauseating cup of liquid. Sardana has been rendering fat all morning, a process you're now watching with the intensity of someone studying for a final exam, because your life might literally depend on knowing this. She starts with chunks of raw fat trimmed from a horse that was slaughtered back in autumn, before the deep freeze set in. The fat has been frozen solid in an outdoor storage pit, preserved perfectly because this entire region is essentially a walk-in freezer for 6 months of the year. She brings in a chunk, maybe 2 kilograms, and sets it near the stove to thaw slightly, not fully, just enough that she can cut it. The cutting is done with a curved blade, a traditional Yakut knife called a kailas, and she works with the kind of casual precision that comes from having done this 10,000 times. Small cubes, maybe 1 centimeter on each side, which will melt faster and more evenly. These go into a heavy iron pot directly on the stovetop, and then the waiting begins. The fat melts slowly, liquefying and releasing its moisture with little popping sounds. You can smell it, this animal warm scent that's not entirely pleasant but not as bad as you'd feared. It smells like survival, you suppose. As the fat renders, impurities float to the top. Little bits of meat, connective tissue, blood. Sardana schemes these off with a slotted wooden spoon, discarding them. What remains is pure, clear liquid fat. She strains it through a cloth into a ceramic container, and this is what ends up in that pot by the table, ready to be ladled out as needed. The leftover solids, the cracklings, don't go to waste either. They're salty, crispy, and packed with protein and residual fat. You try one, and it's actually delicious in a bacon-adjacent way. Empty calories don't exist here. Everything gets consumed. The traditional Yakut diet, you're learning, is almost carnivorous out of necessity. This region isn't exactly hospitable to agriculture. The growing season is maybe 3 months long, and even then, only the hardiest vegetables survive. Historically, the Yakut survived on horse meat, horse milk, horse fat, with some supplementation from reindeer, fish, and wild game when available. No grains to speak of, no fruits. The occasional handful of berries in summer was a treat, not a staple. This is as close to an all-meat diet as humans have historically managed, and it works because fats and proteins provide everything your body needs in this environment. Modern nutritionists would probably have a heart attack looking at this diet. The fat content is astronomical by contemporary standards, probably 60 to 70% of total calories coming from fat. But those nutritionists aren't living at -70°C. They're not burning 5,000 to 6,000 calories per day just maintaining body temperature and performing basic tasks. Context matters, and in this context, fat isn't just food. It's medicine, it's fuel, it's the substance keeping your consciousness tethered to your body. There's a traditional Yakut drink called salamat, different from the breakfast porridge you had, confusingly, same name, different preparation, which is essentially melted butter or fat whipped with flour and sometimes milk into a hot, frothy beverage. Think of it as a primitive bulletproof coffee, except developed centuries before Silicon Valley decided adding butter to coffee was revolutionary. Sardana makes you a cup. The fat froths as she whisks it, incorporating air, turning it into something almost cappuccino-like in texture. It's surreal, sitting in a centuries-old wooden house at the edge of human habitation, drinking artisanal whisked horse fat like it's a latte. The taste is, well, you're getting used to it. Your palate is recalibrating. The overwhelmingly rich, fatty flavor that would have nauseated you yesterday is starting to taste like satisfaction, like warmth, like life continuing. Your body has caught on faster than your brain. It knows what it needs, and it's rewiring your taste preferences accordingly. Historians still argue whether humans in extreme environments develop actual taste preference changes or whether it's purely psychological adaptation, but sitting here craving another cup of melted fat, you suspect there's genuine physiological rewiring happening. One of the quirky historical details about Arctic and subarctic peoples, many of them traditionally had remarkably healthy cardiovascular systems despite the high-fat diet. Early explorers and anthropologists noted that heart disease seemed rare among indigenous populations eating traditional diets, which puzzled them given what we now know about saturated fats and cholesterol. More recent research suggests several factors at play: the extremely high omega-3 content from fish, the lack of processed foods and sugars, the constant physical activity demanded by the environment, and possibly some protective genetic adaptations. Of course, that was traditional diets. Modern Yakut populations with access to processed foods, refined sugars, and sedentary lifestyles are experiencing the same cardiovascular health issues as populations everywhere else. The protective factors were the whole package, the diet in context with the lifestyle and environment, not just the fat consumption alone. You can't just start drinking horse fat in Los Angeles and expect to be healthier. Context, always context. Mikhail explains the hierarchy of fats, which ones are preferred for different purposes. Horse fat is considered the gold standard for drinking. It has a relatively neutral taste, liquefies at a good temperature, and stores well. Reindeer fat is fattier, if that makes sense, with a slightly gamier taste that some people love and others tolerate. Seal fat, in coastal areas, is extremely nutritious but has a much stronger flavor that takes serious getting used to. Fish oils are valued but are more for nutritional supplementation than primary caloric intake. Sardana tells a story, translated by Mikhail, about her grandmother during a particularly brutal winter in the 1940s. The temperature dropped to -77°C. Yes, even colder than what's normal here, and stayed there for almost 2 weeks. Their horse had died, not from cold, ironically, but from an accident, and they'd rendered every bit of fat from the carcass. They survived those 2 weeks primarily on that fat and whatever frozen fish they had stored. No vegetables, no grains, those had run out. Just fat and fish. 16 people in the household, all making it through on stored fat. When she finishes the story, she looks at you meaningfully and says something in Yakut. Mikhail translates, "Fat is not food. Fat is life." You're also learning that there are different ways to consume the fat depending on the situation. If you're about to go outside for an extended period, say checking hunting traps or gathering firewood, you drink it straight and warm, maybe mixed with tea. That gives you an immediate caloric boost that'll sustain heat production while you're exposed to the elements. If you're staying inside but need sustained energy, you incorporate it into meals, letting it digest more slowly alongside proteins and the small amount of carbohydrates available. There's a traditional technique called fat loading that hunters use before multi-day trips. They spend 3 or 4 days consuming even higher amounts of fat than usual, building up their body's fat stores, essentially pre-fueling for the journey. It's based on the understanding that your body can burn its own fat for fuel, but having ample reserves means you're not immediately tapping into muscle and organ tissue when caloric demands spike. Modern endurance athletes do something similar with carb loading. The Yakutia figured out fat loading centuries ago. The mental aspect of drinking fat is something you're wrestling with, though. Your modern, Western-cultured brain has been thoroughly programmed to see dietary fat as the enemy, something to be minimized and avoided. Low-fat everything, fat-free products, the demonization of butter and lard in favor of vegetable oils and margarine. And now here you are, being told that fat, straight, rendered animal fat is your primary survival tool. The cognitive dissonance is real, but you're adapting. The human brain is remarkably plastic when survival is on the line. You're starting to see that pot of fat not as something gross but as something precious. You're starting to notice when your energy dips and proactively reaching for a cup rather than waiting until you're shivering and foggy. You're internalizing the rhythm. Cold exposure demands caloric replacement, and fat is the most efficient replacement available. Simple as that. Mikhail makes you practice rendering fat yourself. It's important, he explains, that you can do this independently. If you're ever alone, if something happens to them, you need to know how to convert raw fat into usable fuel. The process is straightforward but requires attention. Too high heat and the fat scorches, creating an acrid taste and destroying some of the nutritional value. Too low and it takes forever, wasting firewood. You need that middle zone where it melts steadily, rendering clean and pure. You cut the fat. Slowly, carefully, because the chylus is frighteningly sharp and your cold, stiffened fingers don't have their normal dexterity. Small cubes, uniform in size. Into the pot. Onto the heat. Watch it melt. Watch it pop and sizzle as moisture escapes. Skim the impurities. Strain into a clean container. Takes you twice as long as it took Sardana, and your cubes aren't as uniform, but you do it. You render fat. You've acquired a survival skill that 99% of modern humans will never need or possess. As you pour yourself another cup of your own rendered fat, there's a weird pride in that, consuming something you processed yourself. You think about all the people who've never had to negotiate with their food like this, who've never had to drink something unpleasant because the alternative is literally freezing to death, who've never experienced the transition from "this is disgusting" to "this is necessary" to "this is actually what I'm craving now." You're in a very small, very specific club of humans who understand viscerally that food preferences are luxuries and that underneath those luxuries, your body knows exactly what it needs. The afternoon light, such as it is during polar night, just a brief grayish lessening of the darkness, is fading. You've been inside all day learning about fat, and you've consumed probably 1,500 calories of pure fat in various forms. Your stomach feels heavy but warm, and that's the point. That warmth radiating from your core isn't just psychological. It's your metabolism processing those fats, generating heat, keeping your core temperature in the safe zone. Tomorrow, Mikhail says, you'll venture outside for longer, start learning to move and work in the extreme cold. But tonight, you rest, you keep drinking fat and tea, you stay close to the stove, and you let your body continue its adjustment to this new reality. The reality where a cup of rendered horse fat isn't an exotic curiosity or a survival challenge. It's just what you drink to stay conscious, to stay functional, to stay alive. You raise your cup in a silent toast to your own adaptability, and you drink. The pile of dried horse dung sitting in the corner of Mikhail's workshop isn't exactly what you'd put on an Instagram aesthetic board, but you're learning that survival at -70 doesn't care about your aesthetic preferences. This dung, carefully collected, dried, and stored, is going to become a critical component of your shelter, providing insulation that could mean the difference between survivable cold and lethal cold. Welcome to the glamorous world of extreme environment architecture, where literally everything, including excrement, becomes a building material. Today you're learning to build, or more accurately, to help build, a traditional balagan, a winter dwelling that the Yakut have perfected over centuries of living in conditions that would kill most humans within hours. The existing house you've been staying in is relatively modern by local standards, with milled lumber and metal stove parts. But Mikhail wants you to understand the original technology, the knowledge that kept people alive before hardware stores and manufactured goods. So you're constructing a smaller version, essentially a survival shelter, using traditional methods and materials. The location matters first. You can't just plop a structure anywhere on the frozen landscape. Mikhail walks you through the considerations. You want a slight elevation to avoid cold air pooling. Cold air is denser and sinks into low spots, creating frost pockets that can be 10 or 15 degrees colder than areas just a few meters higher. You want protection from the prevailing wind, ideally a natural windbreak like a hillside or thick stand of trees. And you absolutely must build on permafrost that's stable and level, because any melting or shifting will destroy your shelter's integrity. The permafrost here extends down hundreds of meters. Some estimates say up to 1,500 meters in places, legacy of ice ages past and sustained by current conditions. It's not frozen soil exactly. It's more like concrete, hard as granite, and you can't dig into it without specialized equipment or a lot of fire and patience. So you don't. You build on top of it, using stilts or posts to create an air gap between your living space and the frozen ground. This air gap is crucial. It prevents your home's heat from melting the permafrost beneath it, which would cause subsidence, structural damage, and a whole cascade of problems. The stilts themselves are larch logs, maybe 20 centimeters in diameter, sunk into holes that were laboriously created by building fires, letting them burn down, clearing the ash, building more fires, repeating until you've melted and dug down half a meter or so. These holes then refreeze around the posts, locking them in place more securely than concrete ever could. The posts extend about a meter above ground, creating the air gap and also lifting your living space away from the snow that will accumulate over winter. Snow is an insulator, yes, but it's also a moisture source and a cold sink that you don't want in direct contact with your floor. The floor itself is constructed from split logs, laid tightly side by side and notched together. No nails. Metal becomes brittle at these temperatures and can snap under stress. Everything is fitted, notched, lashed with leather or sinew. The logs are positioned with their split side up, creating a relatively flat surface, and any gaps are packed with dried moss. This moss, collected in summer from the taiga, is a spectacular insulator and has natural antimicrobial properties that help prevent rot. Of course, at these temperatures, rot isn't much of a concern. Bacteria don't exactly thrive at -60. But in the brief summer, when temperatures soar to 15 or even 20 Celsius, things can deteriorate fast if you haven't protected properly. The walls are where things get interesting, and where that pile of horse dung comes into play. The traditional construction is double-walled, 2 layers of logs with a gap between them. The inner wall is tight-fitted logs, maybe 10 centimeters thick. The outer wall is similar. The gap between them, perhaps 15 to 20 centimeters, is your insulation space. And what fills that space? A mixture of dried moss, dried grass, deer or horse hair, and yes, dried, pulverized horse dung. Before you recoil in disgust, understand the genius here. Horse dung, once dried, is essentially processed plant fiber. Horses are hindgut fermenters. They don't fully digest their food, so their manure is full of cellulose and lignin, the structural components of plants. Dry it out, break it up, and you've got a loose, fibrous material that traps air beautifully. Air is the actual insulator. Trapped air, specifically air that can't convect and carry heat away. The dung and moss and hair creates millions of tiny air pockets, each one a miniature barrier to heat transfer. Plus, it's abundant and free. Horses produce a lot of manure. In a climate where every calorie and every bit of effort counts, using a waste product as a building material is just efficient. The Yakut aren't sentimental about these things, they're pragmatic. Does it work? Yes. Does it smell? Not after it's dried, and certainly not when it's frozen solid for 9 months of the year. Then it's just another odorless component of the house. You help Mikhail stuff the wall gaps, reaching in with handfuls of the dried mixture, packing it down firmly but not too firmly. compress too much and you squeeze out the air pockets, reducing insulation value. It's repetitive, physical work, and you're sweating inside your layers despite the outside temperature hovering around -65. The sweat is dangerous. Remember, moisture is the enemy. Sweat soaks into your inner layers, reduces their insulation value, and if you stop working and cool down, that moisture can freeze, turning your clothing into a heat-conducting icy shell. Mikhail notices you overheating and makes you stop, strip off a layer, let the sweat evaporate in the dry air before it soaks through. You must learn to layer, he says. Before work, remove layers. During work, stay cool. After work, add layers back before you cool too much. Too hot is as dangerous as too cold. Both kill you, just different speeds. This is another one of those counterintuitive aspects of cold survival that gets people killed, the danger of overheating. You'd think in -70 weather, being too hot would be impossible, but vigorous physical work generates a lot of heat. Your body is already in overdrive, metabolism cranked up, and when you add muscle exertion on top of that, you can easily overheat even in extreme cold. The resulting sweat is insidious because you might not even notice it until you stop working and it starts freezing. The roof construction is its own engineering challenge. It needs to be strong enough to support massive snow loads, several tons over the course of winter, but also needs insulation and a method for smoke to escape without letting all your heat out. The traditional solution is a fairly steep pitch, maybe 45 degrees, which helps snow slide off before it accumulates to dangerous levels. The roof is made from overlapping larch planks, then covered with birch bark, waterproofing, then a thick layer of moss and sod, and finally allowed to freeze into a solid mass. The smoke hole is at the peak, covered with a movable flap that can be adjusted based on wind conditions and how much draft you need for your fire. Too much opening and you lose heat. Too little and you smoke yourself out or suffocate from carbon monoxide. It's a constant balancing act, and reading the smoke hole is a skill the Yakut children learn early. You can tell outside temperature, wind direction, fire intensity, and weather changes all from how the smoke behaves and how the flap needs to be positioned. Speaking of the fire, the stove or fire pit is the absolute heart of the dwelling, and its placement is critical. Center of the room is traditional. This allows heat to radiate evenly in all directions. It's also the safest placement for fire management. The stove itself in traditional construction might be stone or clay, or it might just be a fire pit with rocks arranged around it. More modern versions use cast iron stoves, which retain and radiate heat more efficiently, but the principle remains. Everything in the dwelling is oriented around this central heat source. You help construct a simple stone stove, flat rocks stacked to create a firebox, with larger rocks positioned to create thermal mass. These rocks will absorb heat while the fire burns and continue radiating it after the fire dies down, smoothing out the temperature fluctuations. The stones have to be carefully selected. Not all rock is suitable. Certain types contain moisture pockets that can explosively vaporize when heated, turning your nice heating stone into shrapnel. Mikhail tests each stone by heating it gradually, listening for the telltale hissing or popping that indicates trapped moisture. The door is another critical element, and it's never just a simple door. It's an airlock system, 2 doors separated by a small chamber, the saini. This entrance chamber is maybe 1 meter by 1 meter, barely large enough to stand in, but it's essential. You enter through the outer door, close it, then open the inner door. This prevents direct air exchange between the outside and the living space. The saini itself is unheated and serves as a buffer zone, a place to store tools and outdoor clothing where they won't bring moisture into the warm interior. The outer door is constructed to swing inward. Sounds backward, right? But in a climate where snow can accumulate 2 or 3 meters deep overnight during a blizzard, an outward swinging door can become impossible to open, trapping you inside. Inward swinging doors can always be forced open by pushing against the snow. It's a small detail that can save your life during a whiteout. Windows are minimal, 1, maybe 2 small openings, and even these are a concession to modern sensibilities. Historically, some balagans had no windows at all. Why? Because windows are thermal liabilities. Even with quadruple glazing, even with the smallest possible opening, a window loses heat faster than a well-insulated wall. Glass conducts heat far better than a combination of logs, moss, and trapped air. So you minimize window size, position them on the south side to capture any available sunlight during the brief midday twilight of polar night, and accept that your interior will be dark. The darkness takes adjustment you're discovering. Humans are diurnal creatures. We're wired for daylight. Living in perpetual gloom messes with your circadian rhythms, affects your mood, depletes your vitamin D. The Yakut have cultural adaptations for this: storytelling traditions, music, social gatherings that create psychological stimulation when environmental stimulation is lacking. But it's still hard. The darkness presses in, makes the small space feel smaller, creates a sense of isolation that's almost physical. Historians still argue whether the traditional Yakut lifestyle was sustainable or whether it represented humans living at the absolute edge of viability, one bad winter away from collapse. The historical record shows periodic famines, population crashes when harsh winters killed livestock and depleted food stores. But it also shows remarkable resilience. Communities bouncing back, knowledge preserved and passed down, continuous habitations spanning centuries. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle, sustainable but with zero margin for error. As the small balagan takes shape around you, you develop a visceral appreciation for every element. The careful positioning of each log, the thorough packing of each insulation gap, the precise angling of the roof, none of it is arbitrary. It's all accumulated knowledge, hundreds or thousands of incremental improvements made by people whose lives depended on getting it right. This isn't architecture as art or status. It's architecture as pure survival technology. One quirky historical detail. Traditional balagans were often partially buried or banked with earth and snow on the outside walls once winter set in. The occupants would actually encourage snow accumulation around the base, creating an additional insulation layer. Snow, despite being frozen water, is about 90 to 95% trapped air, making it an excellent insulator. An igloo works on this principle, and the Yakut applied similar logic to their wooden structures. More insulation equals less fuel needed equals better survival odds. You learn about the tools too, the specific axes and adzes shaped for working frozen wood, the techniques for splitting logs when they're so cold they're almost as hard as stone. You can't use metal tools barehanded. The metal is so cold it will instantly bond to your skin, freezing the moisture on your palm to the metal surface. You'd leave skin behind if you pulled away. So everything is done with thick mittens or gloves, which reduces dexterity, which makes the work slower and more difficult, which means you're burning more calories, which means you need to eat more fat. Everything connects back to that fundamental energy equation. By evening, the small balagan is weatherproof, not finished, but livable in an emergency. Mikhail builds a small fire in the stone stove, and you both sit inside, feeling the temperature slowly climb from -50 to -30 to -10 and finally, after several hours, to maybe 5 degrees Celsius. It's extraordinary, watching this tiny wooden box capture and hold heat even as the outside world tries to steal it back. The walls creak and pop as they adjust to the temperature differential, but they hold. The smoke hole draws properly, pulling smoke up and out. The insulation works. You spend the night in the balagan, wrapped in furs, feeding the fire every hour or so, experiencing what countless Yakut families experienced over centuries. The constant awareness of the fire, the careful rationing of wood, the balance between heat and smoke, between comfort and fuel conservation. The knowledge that outside these walls is almost certain death, but inside, with fire and shelter, life continues. It's humbling and empowering at once. The horse dung in the wall stays frozen, odorless, doing its unglamorous job of trapping air and blocking heat loss. Tomorrow you'll learn more: how to improve the structure, how to maintain it, how to make emergency repairs when something fails in the middle of a blizzard. But tonight, in this small wooden box on stilts, insulated with moss and manure, heated by burning larch, you understand something fundamental about human adaptability and ingenuity. We can survive almost anywhere if we're clever enough and humble enough to use whatever materials the environment provides. Even horse shit. The morning routine at -70 is less wake up refreshed and more gradual reanimation from a state approximating hibernation. You open your eyes to find them crusted shut with frozen tears and sleep residue, and you have to gently warm your eyelids with your fingers. Still inside your mittens, never bare skin, before you can blink properly. Your breath has created a layer of frost on the inside of your fur sleeping hood, little ice crystals that tickle your face as you move. Everything hurts in that deep, bone-level way that comes from spending 8 hours in near-freezing temperatures despite all your furs and layers. The fire has died down to coals. This is bad. Mikhail is already awake, already feeding it, coaxing it back to life with small pieces of kindling and some birch bark that catches quickly. You check the time. It's 9 a.m., though you'd never know it from the darkness outside. The winter sun, on the days it bothers to appear at all this far north, makes a brief, apologetic cameo around midday, never climbing more than a few degrees above the horizon, casting long shadows and weak, sideways light that does almost nothing to warm the landscape. Fire dies every 47 minutes if you don't feed it, Mikhail says, not looking up from his work. You realize he's been keeping track, probably waking every hour through the night to add wood. This is life here, constant vigilance, constant maintenance. Sleep in shifts or accept that you'll wake to a cold house and hours of work rebuilding warmth. Some families, you're learning, had designated fire watchers during the coldest weeks, someone always awake, always monitoring, while others slept. You need to pee again, and you dread it, but biology doesn't negotiate. You begin the laborious process of dressing for outside. This isn't like pulling on a coat and stepping out. This is a 15-minute procedure of layering, checking, securing. First, verify that your base layers are dry. Any dampness from yesterday's sweat needs to be dried by the fire before you put them on, or you're creating a thermal liability. Then the inner wool layer, then the outer wool layer, then the wind-resistant outer garment made from reindeer hide. The footwear is its own science. You start with wool socks, then a second pair, then torabaski, traditional Yakut boots made from reindeer leg skin with fur turned inward. But between the inner boot and the outer layers, you pack dried grass. Yes, grass. It provides additional insulation and, critically, it absorbs moisture from your feet. You'll replace this grass every day. Pull it out, dry it by the fire, pack fresh grass in. Let moisture accumulate in your boots and your feet will freeze, simple as that. The hand situation is complicated. Mittens are warmer than gloves. Keeping fingers together allows them to share heat. But mittens are useless for detailed work. So you have a layering system. Thin wool glove liners for dexterity when you absolutely need it, then thick wool mittens, then outer mittens made from windproof material. Your hands will still get cold, but this system buys you time, maybe extends your working period outside from 5 minutes to 15 before you have to retreat to warmth. The face covering is the most critical piece. Mikhail helps you with what looks like a medieval torture device, but is actually a masterpiece of cold weather design. A fur-lined hood that covers your entire head, with just a small opening for your eyes, and a multi-layered breathing apparatus that pre-warms air before it hits your lungs. The outer layer catches your breath moisture and freezes it before it can soak through to inner layers. You'll periodically have to break off this ice buildup, but that's better than having wet fabric against your face conducting cold directly to your skin. Fully dressed, you look like an overstuffed bear, and you've probably added 10 kilograms of clothing weight. Moving is difficult, your range of motion is severely restricted. But this is what it takes. Exposed skin at these temperatures develops frostbite in 90 seconds. They say, though you suspect it's even faster. The cold here is aggressive, actively malicious in its efficiency at stealing heat. You step into the Sani, the airlock chamber, and the temperature drop is immediate even though you haven't opened the outer door yet. This buffer zone is probably -40. And that 20-degree difference from the main room is noticeable even through all your layers. Mikhail goes first, demonstrating the procedure. Open outer door quickly, step through, close it immediately. Don't linger, don't hesitate. Every second that door is open, warm air escapes and cold air infiltrates. The outer world hits you like a physical blow. The cold doesn't creep, it attacks. Your first breath, even through the face covering, sends that now familiar icy stab through your respiratory system. Your eyes water reflexively, and those tears try to freeze on your eyelashes. You blink rapidly, keeping things moving, because if your eyelids freeze shut out here, you're in serious trouble. The village is waking up around you, though waking up is a generous description. Smoke pours from every chimney, those thick white columns freezing into ice fog immediately, and creating a perpetual ground-level cloud. Visibility is maybe 20 meters in this fog. Everything beyond that just vague shapes and shadows. You can hear the village, though, the creak of doors, the crack of frozen wood being split, someone's dog barking with that muffled quality that sound has in extreme cold. The outhouse trip is mercifully quick, and you're learning to manage the necessary exposure with speed and efficiency. Back inside, you're shivering violently, your body screaming at you for that unnecessary cold exposure. Your fingers are numb despite the mittens. Your face aches where the cold found microscopic gaps in your covering. Mikhail hands you tea and fat immediately. The routine is automatic now. Outside equals caloric debt. Inside equals repayment. Today's lesson is learning to move and work in the cold for extended periods. Not just dashing to the outhouse and back, but actual sustained activity, checking hunting traps, gathering firewood, maintaining equipment. Things that can't be done from inside the shelter, things that are nevertheless essential for survival. You're going to learn the hard way that there's a massive difference between surviving the cold passively, staying inside, and surviving it actively, working in it. The first task is firewood. The pile inside is getting low, and there's a larger stockpile about 50 meters from the house, stacked and covered with canvas to keep snow off. 50 meters doesn't sound far until you're trudging through knee-deep snow in -70 weather wearing 10 kilos of clothing that restricts your movement to something approximating a drunk penguin's waddle. Mikhail demonstrates the walking technique. High steps, lifting knees up and forward to clear the snow rather than trying to push through it. Energy conservation is critical. Thrashing through snow inefficiently will exhaust you in minutes and send your caloric burn skyrocketing. Smooth, deliberate movements. Breathe steadily through your nose when possible, letting your sinuses pre-warm the air. If you have to breathe through your mouth because you're working hard, do it through the fabric covering, accepting the ice buildup as a necessary cost. The snow itself is weird at these temperatures. It's not the soft, packable snow you make snowballs with. It's crystalline, almost squeaky, so dry that it doesn't stick together at all. Each flake is a tiny ice crystal, perfect and geometric, and they don't melt when they touch your clothing. They just sit there, frozen and stable until you brush them off. In some ways, this is good. Moisture isn't soaking into your clothes. But it also means the snow doesn't compact. You can't break a trail through it effectively because it doesn't hold shape. Reaching the woodpile, you start loading split logs into a canvas sling that you'll drag back to the house. The wood is frozen solid, hard as stone, and grabbing it even with mittens sends cold shooting through the fabric. You work quickly, stack maybe 20 logs, and Mikhail says that's enough. You've been outside for 8 minutes. The trip back is harder, you're pulling weight, working against resistance, and your body is burning fuel rapidly. You can feel the heat generation, your muscles working overtime, and paradoxically you're almost sweating again despite the -70 air temperature. This is the dangerous zone where you're exerting enough to generate heat but not so much that you stay warm indefinitely. Stop moving and the cold catches up immediately. Back at the house, you're gasping, heart pounding, and your face covering is now a rigid ice mask. Mikhail shows you how to snap it off. Literally break the ice away from the fabric in sheets before you go inside. Bring that ice inside and it melts, soaks the fabric, creates a worse problem for next time. Everything requires this kind of forward thinking. What will the consequences be later of what I do now? Inside, you strip off the outer layers while they're still cold. Hang them in the sani where they'll stay frozen but won't bring moisture into the living space. The tea and fat are waiting. You drink without prompting now, understanding that you've just burned probably 300 calories in 10 minutes of wood hauling, and those calories need immediate replacement. Your fingers throb as they rewarm, that awful pins and needles sensation that means you got them a little too cold but not quite to frostbite. Mikhail checks them, examines the tips, looking for the telltale white or grayish patches that indicate tissue damage. They're pink and painful, which is actually good. Pain means nerves are functioning, blood is flowing. It's the absence of pain, the numb whiteness, that signals real trouble. The rest of the morning is a cycle. Warm up for 30 minutes, go outside for 5 to 10 minutes, return and rewarm. You're checking trap lines today, snares set for rabbits and foxes, a traditional supplementary food source. The traps are spread out over maybe half a kilometer, and checking them all will require multiple excursions into the cold. The first trap has frozen shut, the mechanism locked by ice. Mikhail shows you how to warm it with your breath carefully, not too much moisture, just enough to melt the crucial moving parts so you can reset it. This requires taking off your outer mittens, working with just the wool liner gloves, and your hands start freezing almost immediately. 30 seconds of work, then mittens back on, hands tucked into armpits to rewarm. Another 30 seconds. It's painstaking, and you understand why things that would take 5 minutes in normal weather take an hour here. One trap has caught a rabbit, frozen solid in death. This is a small victory, maybe half a kilo of meat plus the fur. Nothing gets wasted. The rabbit goes into a bag, already frozen, and it'll stay frozen until you decide to cook it. No refrigeration needed when the entire outside world is a freezer. Historians note that food preservation was never a problem in the Arctic winter. The challenge was keeping food from freezing so hard that it couldn't be eaten. By midday, marked not by sunshine but by a slight, almost imperceptible lightening of the darkness to a deep gray, you've been outside for a cumulative 30 minutes and inside for 2 hours. This ratio is about right for sustained activity in extreme cold. You can't stay out longer without serious risk, and even these brief exposures are taxing your body enormously. You're exhausted in a way that feels disproportionate to the actual physical work you've done, but cold exposure is itself exhausting. Your body is running at maximum metabolic output, fighting to maintain temperature, and it's tiring even when you're sitting still. Lunch is stroganina, frozen raw fish, sliced paper thin with a sharp knife. The fish is white fish, probably caught through the ice during early winter and stored frozen. Sliced thin enough it's actually possible to eat while still frozen, and the flavor is surprisingly delicate. You dip it in salt and eat it with chunks of frozen butter. It sounds insane, eating frozen food in a barely heated house when you're already cold, but the alternative, thawing and cooking it, costs precious fuel and time. You adapt. The afternoon brings equipment maintenance. Everything metal needs constant attention because metal contracts in cold, and different metals contract at different rates. This creates stress points, potential fractures. Tools need to be checked, tested. The splitting axe gets examined for cracks. The knife blades get inspected. Nothing can fail when you're depending on it because failure in the field means you're stuck in -70 trying to improvise repairs with freezing fingers and fading light. You also learn about the metal skin problem in more detail. Mikhail heats a piece of scrap metal near the fire until it's maybe -30 instead of -70. Then touches his bare finger to it briefly, just a tap. Even at that warm temperature, he leaves a small piece of skin behind. The moisture on his skin froze to the metal instantly, creating a bond. This is why, he says, showing you the tiny red spot on his fingertip. You never touch metal without gloves. And not just thin gloves, thick ones. Metal sucks heat faster than you believe. There's a quirky piece of physics at work here that's worth understanding: thermal conductivity. Different materials conduct heat at different rates. Metal is an excellent conductor, which means it very efficiently pulls heat away from your skin. Wood is a poor conductor, which is why you can grab a wooden handle on a metal tool without immediate freezing. The metal part of the same tool will freeze you instantly, but the wooden handle is safe. This is why traditional Yakut tools have oversized wooden or bone handles. Maximum insulation between your hand and the metal working surface. Evening comes, not that you can tell from outside, where it's been dark all day, but from the clock and from the rhythm your body is learning. Early dinner, more fat consumption, more tea. Your caloric intake today has probably exceeded 5,000 calories, and you're still hungry. This is normal, Mikhail assures you. Your body is adapting, ramping up its metabolic rate, and it needs fuel constantly. Fight the hunger and you'll weaken. Satisfy it and you'll adapt. The social aspect of the long evening is interesting. With 16+ hours of darkness and no ability to work outside safely after about 4 p.m., people here have developed rich indoor cultural traditions. Storytelling, obviously, the Yakut have epic poems that take hours to recite, historical narratives that preserve tribal memory across generations. Music too, though instruments require special care in the cold. Wood dries out and cracks, metal parts freeze and bind, but people adapt, create instruments designed for the climate. Sardana tells stories tonight, in Yakut with Mikhail translating the key parts. Tales of shamans and spirits, of the harsh winter personified as a malevolent being that can be bargained with but never defeated, only survived. The stories aren't entertainment exactly. They're cultural technology, encoding survival wisdom in narrative form. The tale about the hunter who ignored his grandmother's advice about checking his boots for ice buildup? That's not just a story. It's a warning, a lesson about complacency killing you even when you think you're experienced. You go to bed having survived your first full day of activity in extreme cold. Your body aches. Your face is raw in spots where the cold found gaps in your protection. Your fingers throb with that deep ache that comes from repeated mild frostbite. But you're alive, you're learning, and you're beginning to understand the rhythm. The cycle of cold exposure and rewarming, the constant feeding and fueling, the mental vigilance required to spot problems before they become fatal. Tomorrow you'll do it again, and the day after, and the day after that. This is life now. Not comfortable, not easy, but possible. Just before sleep, you check yourself in the small mirror Mikhail has propped near the stove. Your face is weathered already, reddened and chapped despite just a few days here. Your eyes look tired. But there's something else too, a sharpness and alertness. Your body knows it's in survival mode, and it's responding. For better or worse, you're adapting to Yakutia. The frozen fish arrives at the table looking less like food and more like a small wooden club. Rigid, crystalline, and so cold that touching it barehanded would be genuinely stupid. This is stroganina, and it's about to become a major part of your diet whether you like it or not. Mikhail holds the fish by its tail with one gloved hand and produces a wickedly sharp knife with the other, and then proceeds to perform what looks like carpentry but is actually food preparation. He's shaving the fish, creating paper-thin translucent curls that pile up on a wooden board like some kind of bizarre frozen sashimi. "Eat quick," he says, gesturing to the growing pile. "Let it warm too much becomes mushy. Eat frozen is good." He demonstrates, taking a curl, dipping it in a mixture of salt and pepper, and eating it with evident satisfaction. The fish is whitefish, probably whitefish or broad whitefish, common in the local rivers and lakes, caught through ice fishing and immediately frozen solid. At -60 or 70, this takes approximately 30 seconds from water to rock-hard preservation. You try a piece. Weird. The texture is crisp, almost crunchy, and it melts slightly on your tongue from your body heat, releasing a clean, delicate fish flavor. There's no fishiness in the bad sense. The extreme cold has essentially suspended all the chemical processes that make fish go off. This fish might have been caught 3 months ago, but it tastes fresh because from a bacterial and enzymatic perspective, time has stopped. It's been in stasis, waiting in nature's freezer for this moment. Historians still argue whether the traditional Yakut diet was nutritionally complete or whether people suffered from deficiencies despite the high caloric intake. The answer seems to be mostly complete with some clever workarounds. Vitamin C, the classic scurvy prevention nutrient, comes primarily from fresh fruits and vegetables in most diets. The Yakut get almost none of those in winter, but they get it from other sources. Raw frozen fish and meat retain some vitamin C that would be destroyed by cooking, frozen berries collected in fall and stored, and most importantly, kumis, fermented mare's milk that contains active bacteria producing B vitamins and some vitamin C. The fermented mare's milk situation is its own adventure. Sardana keeps a leather bag of it hanging in the coldest corner of the seine, where it stays just barely liquid, probably around -2 or 3 Celsius. The fermentation, driven by lactobacilli and yeast, produces a slightly alcoholic, sour beverage that tastes like liquid sour yogurt mixed with the vaguest hint of barn. You've tried it. You're not a fan, but you drink it anyway because vitamin deficiency leads to scurvy, and scurvy leads to your teeth falling out and your old wounds reopening and eventually death. So you drink the weird cold horse milk and you don't complain. The diet here, you're realizing, is a constant calculation of nutritional completeness versus availability versus energy cost of preparation. Every meal has to answer multiple questions. Does this provide enough calories? Does it provide necessary nutrients? Can we prepare it without spending excessive fuel? Can we eat it in a form that doesn't lower our core temperature? Take salamat, that butterflower porridge you had for breakfast. It's primarily fat and carbohydrates, energy-dense but not nutritionally diverse. But paired with stroganina, protein and some omega-3s, and some frozen berries, vitamin C and antioxidants, you've got a reasonably complete meal. Nothing fresh, nothing green, nothing crunchy in the vegetable sense, but everything your body needs to continue functioning at -70. The preparation methods are constrained by fuel availability and the need to maintain warmth. Cooking means burning wood, and wood is precious. Every log burned for cooking is a log not available for heating. So the Yakut developed food traditions that minimize cooking. Raw frozen fish and meat feature heavily. When you do cook, you do it efficiently, one-pot meals that combine multiple ingredients, utilizing every bit of heat from a single fire. Boiled meat is common. Throw chunks of frozen horse or reindeer into a pot with water. Bring it to a boil. Cook until tender. The resulting broth is rich with fat and collagen, and you drink every drop because that's liquid calories and nutrients. Nothing gets wasted. The bones get cracked open for marrow, arguably the most nutritionally dense food available, packed with fat, protein, and minerals. You roast them in the fire until they split, then scoop out the soft marrow and eat it straight or mix it with other foods. There's a traditional dish called ohwoko, which is essentially frozen blood beaten with fat and wild berries into a sort of ice cream consistency. It sounds horrifying to modern sensibilities, but it's actually brilliant. Blood is rich in iron and protein, fat provides calories, berries provide vitamins, and the frozen preparation means no cooking fuel required. You can just beat it in a bowl until it reaches the right consistency and eat it. You haven't tried this yet. You're working up to it. The bread situation is interesting because grain cultivation this far north is basically impossible, so flour is a precious imported commodity. What little bread exists is treated like gold. Mikhail shows you a loaf that's been frozen since autumn. Dark, dense rye bread, hard as a brick. You don't slice it, you saw it. The pieces are then briefly warmed near the fire. Not toasted, just brought up to a temperature where they won't shatter your teeth when you bite them. Spread with butter or fat. This bread is amazing. Each bite savored because bread is a rare luxury. Milk is interesting too. Cows don't thrive in these temperatures. They can survive, but they're miserable and their milk production drops. Horses and reindeer are more cold tolerant. Mare's milk is thinner than cow's milk but still nutritious. And as mentioned, it ferments into kumis. Reindeer milk is incredibly rich, almost 20% fat compared to about 4% in cow's milk. A cup of reindeer milk is like drinking liquid energy. But reindeer are semi-wild and milking them is difficult, so it's not a daily staple, more an occasional luxury. The preservation techniques extend beyond just freezing. Fermenting is huge, kumis obviously, but also fermented fish, a preparation that sounds like the Asian fermented fish sauces but adapted to the cold climate. You bury fish in a pit, let naturally occurring bacteria partially break it down. This happens slowly in the cold. And what you get is this pungent, almost cheese-like substance that keeps for months and provides protein and beneficial bacteria for gut health. You haven't tried this yet either. Again, working up to it. Fat storage is its own science. Rendered fat, properly stored in ceramic or leather containers and kept frozen, lasts essentially forever. But it has to be kept frozen and protected from oxygen exposure. Rancidity is caused by oxidation, and even in the cold, exposed fat will slowly oxidize and go bad. So containers are sealed with additional fat or wax, creating an airtight barrier. The fat you're drinking daily was probably rendered last autumn and has been in perfect stasis ever since. Sardana shows you the food storage system, essentially a pit dug down into the permafrost, lined with wood, and covered with a thick lid and more insulation. It's a naturally refrigerated cellar, maintaining a constant temperature just below freezing year-round. In here are frozen carcasses of horses and reindeer slaughtered in the fall, bags of frozen berries, containers of rendered fat, frozen fish, everything organized and inventoried. This is the community's bank account, except instead of money it's calories, and running out means starvation. There's a social hierarchy around food sharing that you're beginning to understand. Successful hunters share their kills with the community, especially with elders and families with young children. This isn't charity, it's insurance. Next time, you might be the one with hungry children, and the community will share with you. Hoarding food is technically possible but socially catastrophic. You'll be shunned, and in a place where cooperation is the only thing keeping everyone alive, being shunned is potentially a death sentence. The quirky detail that fascinates you: how they prevent food theft from outdoor storage. You'd think in extreme cold, with food frozen solid and stored outside, theft would be easy. But the Yakut have a simpler security system than locks, community surveillance, and social consequences. Everyone knows everyone else's storage locations. Someone stealing would be identified immediately, and the social consequences, loss of trust, loss of reciprocal sharing rights, make theft incredibly costly. Plus, in a weird way, the abundance of frozen preserved food reduces theft motivation. It's not like anyone's going hungry enough to risk social exile. Meal timing is different here too. You don't really have breakfast, lunch, and dinner in the contemporary sense. You have a cycle of constant small meals and snacks, because your body is burning calories continuously and needs continuous replenishment. Wake up, tea and fat. Mid-morning, stroganina and bread. Early afternoon, boiled meat and broth. Late afternoon, more tea and fat. Evening, another substantial meal. Before bed, a final cup of fat to fuel your metabolism through the night. Grazing, essentially, but with extremely calorie-dense foods. The taste adaptation is real. Things that would have disgusted you a week ago are now not just tolerable but actively appealing. That cup of warm horse fat? You actually look forward to it now. Your body has rewired your taste preferences based on what it needs, and what it needs is fat, protein, and calories in massive quantities. The concept of eating light has no meaning here. Every meal is heavy, rich, dense. It has to be. You're also learning about the psychological relationship with food in extreme environments. Food isn't just fuel. It's comfort, it's morale. It's a reason to keep going when the darkness and cold press in. The evening meal, eaten together around the stove, is a social ritual as much as a nutritional necessity. The sharing of food reinforces community bonds. The stories told during meals, the laughter, the human connection. It's all part of survival. One night, Mikhail makes otuk, a special ceremonial dish, the roasted rib section of a horse, cooked slowly over the fire until the fat renders and the meat becomes incredibly tender. This is feast food, not daily fare, and the fact that he's making it is a mark of respect, an acknowledgement that you're being integrated into the household. You eat the rich, fatty meat with your hands, grease running down your fingers, and it's genuinely one of the best things you've ever tasted. Context matters. This food, in this place, with these people, under these conditions, it's perfect. The relationship with hunger is evolving too. You've been hungry, actually hungry, in a way you've probably never experienced before. Not the skipped lunch hunger of your previous life, but the deep, gnawing emptiness that comes from your body burning 5,000 or 6,000 calories a day and demanding replacement. This hunger doesn't accept excuses or delays. It's urgent and constant. But you're also learning to distinguish between hunger that needs immediate addressing and hunger that can wait an hour while you complete a task. Your body is becoming more efficient at signaling its actual needs versus mere wants. By the end of your second week, your diet looks insane on paper. Probably 60 to 70% fat, 25 to 30% protein, maybe 5 to 10% carbohydrates. No fresh vegetables. No fruits except frozen berries. Nothing raw except frozen fish and meat. But you're thriving in the sense that you're alive, functional, and adapting. Your body has become a calorie-burning furnace, and you're fueling it with whatever works in this impossible climate. You've also gained weight, maybe 2 or 3 kilograms, despite the intense physical demands. But it's not typical weight gain. It's your bodybuilding cold-adapted reserves, increasing brown adipose tissue, thickening subcutaneous fat layers to improve insulation. You're literally changing shape in response to the environment, becoming a cold weather specialist whether you intended to or not. The frozen fish arrives at the table again for tonight's meal. Another session of watching Mikhail shave it into translucent curls. Another pile of stroganina waiting to be eaten before it warms and turns mushy. You reach for it without hesitation now. Dip it in salt. Eat it with the same satisfaction Mikhail shows. Your palate has changed. Your body has changed. You're becoming, at least temporarily, Yakut in your nutritional adaptation. And that cup of warm horse fat waiting next to your plate? That's not a challenge anymore. That's dessert. The darkness is doing things to your mind. It's been 3 weeks since you arrived, and the sun still hasn't made a proper appearance. Just that brief, anemic grayish glow around noon that barely qualifies as twilight before darkness reasserts itself. 23 hours of night, every day, and your brain is starting to protest in subtle ways you didn't anticipate. You find yourself staring at the fire for extended periods, losing track of time, your thoughts wandering down strange corridors. You're not quite hallucinating, but you're not quite entirely present either. Seasonal affective disorder is what psychologists call it in milder climates, the depression and lethargy that comes from insufficient light exposure. But what you're experiencing in Yakutia is SAD's terrifying older sibling, the kind that drove Arctic explorers to madness and made sailors on polar expeditions describe seeing things that weren't there, hearing voices in the wind, feeling presences in empty rooms. The human mind was not designed for this level of sensory deprivation combined with constant low-level threat. Your circadian rhythm, that internal biological clock regulated by light and darkness, is completely confused. It wants a day-night cycle, it's getting only night-night cycle. Melatonin, the hormone that regulates sleep, is probably being produced at weird times because your brain can't figure out when night actually is when it's always dark. You find yourself sleeping at odd hours, waking disoriented, unable to tell if it's 2 a.m. or 2 p.m. without checking the clock. Time becomes slippery, unreliable. Mikhail has noticed your increasing thousand-yard stare. Winter madness, he says matter-of-factly. Everyone gets it, some worse than others. The darkness eats your mind if you let it. He explains that the traditional Yakut have specific cultural practices to combat this psychological erosion. Storytelling, obviously, providing mental stimulation and social connection. Music and singing activating different neural pathways. Communal work projects, giving purpose and structure to days that would otherwise blur into undifferentiated darkness. There's also menanerek, a traditional practice of visiting. Basically mandatory social calls where families rotate hosting each other for evening gatherings. Not optional socializing but culturally required, because people recognize that isolation in the darkness leads to deterioration. You're social creatures, humans, and solitary confinement in the dark is a recognized form of torture for good reason. The menanerek system ensures nobody spends too many consecutive days alone with their thoughts and the darkness. But even with social supports, the psychological pressure is intense. You catch yourself engaging in strange behaviors, counting the logs in the wall repeatedly, arranging and rearranging your few possessions in meaningless patterns, having entire conversations in your head with people who aren't here. Is this normal? Is this the beginning of something worse? You can't tell, and that uncertainty feeds anxiety, which feeds more strange behaviors. The cold itself has psychological effects beyond just the physical discomfort. Constant pain wears you down mentally. Your face always aches from the cold exposure. Your fingers throb with that deep bone-level ache from repeated mild frostbite. Your body is always slightly uncomfortable, too cold, then too warm near the fire, then too cold again. There's no comfortable equilibrium. This constant low-level physical distress erodes your mental resilience in ways you didn't predict. Sleep is weird now too. You sleep more than usual, maybe 9 or 10 hours a night, but it's not restful sleep. You wake frequently, disoriented. Your dreams are vivid and strange, full of impossible temperatures and distorted spaces. Sometimes you dream you're warm, truly warm, on a beach somewhere with sun on your skin, and waking from that into the cold, dark reality of the Balagan is crushing. The disappointment is almost physical. Historians document cases of Arctic hysteria or menanerek among indigenous populations. Episodes of sudden irrational behavior, screaming, running into the cold without clothing, attacking others. Modern psychiatry would probably classify these as acute psychotic episodes triggered by extreme environmental stress, vitamin deficiencies, social isolation, and the sensory deprivation of polar night. The Yakut understood these episodes as spiritual, a person temporarily losing connection to their soul, but whether you call it spiritual or psychiatric, the result is the same, the mind breaking under pressure. You're not at that point. You're functional, But you understand how people could get there. You understand the stories of explorers going mad, of trappers found frozen in strange positions, having apparently made bizarre, irrational decisions in their final hours. When your brain is running on fumes, deprived of light, deprived of varied sensory input, exhausted from constant cold stress, rationality becomes optional, negotiable. Mikhail teaches you some coping strategies. First, maintain routine rigidly. Wake at the same time every day regardless of external darkness. Perform the same morning rituals. Eat at consistent times. The routine provides psychological structure when environmental cues are absent. Your brain can latch onto patterns even when it can't latch onto daylight. Second, light, artificial though it may be. The dim firelight isn't enough. Mikhail has a small kerosene lamp that he lights for a few hours each evening, and he insists you sit near it. Let your eyes absorb the light even though it's not sunlight. Your brain needs light, any light, to maintain some connection to normalcy. Modern research on Antarctic stations confirms this. Full-spectrum light therapy is standard protocol for maintaining mental health during polar night. Third, physical activity. Force yourself to move, even when you don't want to, even when the darkness makes you want to curl up and hibernate. Exercise generates endorphins, maintains physical health, and gives your mind something to focus on besides the oppressive darkness. Mikhail has you help with daily chores even when he doesn't really need help, and you understand now that this is therapeutic as much as practical. Fourth, limit time alone with your thoughts. When you find yourself spiraling into dark rumination, which happens increasingly, engage with others. Talk, even if you don't have anything particular to say. Listen to stories. Play simple games. Anything to interrupt the negative thought loops that the darkness seems to encourage. The isolation aspect is particularly challenging. You're surrounded by people, Mikhail, Sardana, the village community, but they're not your people. You can't fully communicate with most of them. Your Russian is serviceable but limited, and your Yakut is essentially non-existent. So you're in this weird liminal space of being physically surrounded but socially isolated, which might be worse than total solitude. At least in total solitude, you wouldn't have the constant reminder of connection you can't quite achieve. You find yourself thinking obsessively about home, wherever that is for you. Not the physical place necessarily, but the concept of warmth, of light, of casual comfort. You fantasize about mundane things. Taking a hot shower, walking outside without 15 minutes of preparation, seeing green growing things, feeling the sun on your bare skin. These fantasies are simultaneously comforting and torturous because they emphasize what you don't have, can't have, won't have for months. There's a quirky phenomenon called the third quarter phenomenon, documented in long-duration expeditions and missions, a psychological crisis that typically hits about 3/4 of the way through an extended deployment. But in polar night conditions, this crisis can hit much earlier and harder because the sensory deprivation and environmental hostility accelerate psychological wear. You're maybe 1/4 of the way through winter, and you're already feeling the strain. The combination of darkness, cold, isolation, and monotony creates a perfect storm for depression. Clinical depression, not just feeling sad. The kind where getting out of your sleeping furs feels impossibly difficult, where eating becomes a chore rather than a pleasure, where nothing provides satisfaction or joy. You're not there yet, but you can feel it lurking at the edges of your consciousness, waiting for any sign of weakness. Sardana, who survived 83 winters here, seems immune to the psychological effects that plague you. But when you watch her carefully, you notice coping behaviors so ingrained they're automatic. She never stops moving during waking hours, always has a task. Sewing, cooking, hide processing, something. She sings to herself constantly, little wordless tunes that provide auditory stimulation. She positions herself where she can see the fire, keeping that visual focus point always available. She's adapted, but the adaptation itself reveals the constant battle. The village has a communal gathering house, a larger balagan where people congregate several nights a week. Tonight is one of those nights, and Mikhail insists you come despite your growing reluctance to leave the familiar confines of your current shelter. The walk through the darkness and ice fog is disorienting. You can barely see Mikhail even though he's just 2 meters ahead. Sound is muffled, weird. You feel untethered from reality, like you're floating through some liminal void rather than walking across a village you've been living in for weeks. Inside the gathering house, maybe 40 people are assembled, the entire village population from infants to elders. The warmth from so many bodies and a massive central fire is shocking after the outside cold. People are talking, laughing, and the noise, actual human noise, varied and chaotic, is almost overwhelming after the quiet isolation you've been experiencing. Your brain lights up with the stimulation, desperate for this social contact even as you feel socially anxious about engaging with it. Someone produces a komis, a traditional Yakut jaw harp, and begins playing. The sound is otherworldly. A thrumming, resonant tone with overtones that seem to bypass your ears and vibrate directly in your skull. It's hypnotic, trance-inducing even, and you understand why shamanic traditions incorporated these instruments. In a state of sensory deprivation, your brain is primed to latch onto any novel stimulation, and music becomes almost psychedelic in its intensity. The evening proceeds with storytelling, more music, some traditional games you don't fully understand but participate in anyway. Children run around with an energy that seems impossible given the environment, but they're adapted in ways you're not born here, raised here, their psychology shaped from infancy to handle the darkness and cold. They play and laugh and scream with delight, and it's a reminder that life persists even here, that the human capacity for joy isn't entirely crushed by the environment. As the gathering winds down and you prepare to walk back through the darkness, you realize you feel better. Not good, exactly, but less oppressed, less isolated. The social contact has done something your rational mind couldn't do alone. Reminded you that you're part of a community, that others are experiencing the same darkness and surviving it, that you're not alone in your struggle even when it feels that way. The walk back is still disorienting, still unsettling, but slightly less so. You're learning, slowly, the psychological survival techniques that complement the physical ones. Stay connected, maintain routine, keep moving, accept the darkness rather than fighting it. These aren't solutions, there's no solving the polar night, but they're coping mechanisms, ways to reduce the psychological damage, to emerge from winter with your mind relatively intact. Back in the Balagan, lying in your furs, you think about the conversation you overheard at the gathering. Two men discussing someone who went into the darkness last winter. A euphemism you gradually understood meant suicide. The darkness takes some people completely, overwhelms their ability to cope, and they choose permanent darkness over continuing to fight the temporary one. It's sobering. It's a reminder that this isn't adventure tourism. It's a genuine battle for survival on multiple fronts, and not everyone wins. But you're still here, still fighting, still adapting. The darkness presses in, the cold waits outside, and your mind wages its invisible war against both. Tomorrow you'll wake up, follow the routine, engage with the community, keep moving forward, because that's what survival here demands. Not heroism, not triumph, just persistent, grinding resilience. One dark day after another until eventually, impossibly, spring. The scream that wakes you isn't human. It's the wind, howling through some gap in the structure with a sound like a wounded animal. A blizzard has arrived, and with it, all the things that can go catastrophically wrong when you're living in a wooden box at the edge of human habitability. Mikhail is already up, moving quickly but not panicking, which is somehow more concerning than if he were panicking. Panic means surprise. This calm urgency means he expected this, knows exactly how dangerous it is. Blizzard, he says, unnecessarily. You can hear it, feel it, the whole Balagan shuddering under wind gusts that must be hitting 80 or 90 kilometers per hour. We check everything. If something fails now, we have maybe 1 hour to fix before we freeze. He's not exaggerating. In blizzard conditions at -70 with high winds, the effective temperature, what they call wind chill, can drop to -100 or lower. At those temperatures, exposed skin freezes in under 30 seconds. Being outside for more than a few minutes without perfect protection is a death sentence. The first check is the smoke hole. If it gets blocked by snow, and in these winds, snow is being driven horizontally, getting into every crack and crevice. The house fills with smoke and carbon monoxide. You suffocate or get poisoned while staying warm, which is a darkly ironic way to die. Mikhail peers up at it, watching the smoke behavior. Still drawing, but barely. Snow is definitely accumulating up there, and it'll need clearing soon. Second check. The door seals. The outer door is already developing ice buildup around the edges where wind-driven snow is forcing through microscopic gaps and immediately freezing. This ice buildup can actually help seal the gaps, but too much and the door won't open at all. You'll be entombed inside. Mikhail chips away excess ice with a knife, carefully balancing between sealed and functional. Third check. The walls and roof. You both walk the interior perimeter, looking and listening for any signs of structural stress. A log that's cracked from extreme cold, a section of wall where wind is penetrating, a roof area where snow load is becoming dangerous. Everything seems solid for now, but for now is doing a lot of work in that sentence. This blizzard could last hours or days, and conditions can change rapidly. The fire is burning hot, hotter than usual, because Mikhail is compensating for heat loss from the wind finding ways through the structure. But burning hot means burning fast, and your fuel supply is finite. You have maybe 3 days of wood inside the house. More outside in the covered pile, but accessing it in these conditions is borderline suicidal. So fuel management becomes critical. Burn enough to stay alive, not so much that you run out before the blizzard ends. Your first taste of real crisis comes around mid-morning when Sardana points out that one of the wall sections is developing frost on the interior. This should be impossible. The inside wall shouldn't be cold enough for frost to form. It means cold air is infiltrating somehow, which means there's a breach in the insulation, which means heat is escaping rapidly. Mikhail investigates and discovers that wind-driven snow has somehow forced its way into the wall cavity through a tiny gap near the roof, displacing the insulation and creating a thermal bridge. The fix requires going into the Seine, that unheated airlock that's currently hovering around -50, and accessing the wall cavity from there. Mikhail gears up like he's going outside because from a temperature perspective he might as well be. He's in there for maybe 10 minutes, and when he comes back his eyebrows are white with frost and he's shivering violently despite his layers. He's packed fresh moss into the gap, blocking the snow infiltration, but the effort has cost him significant body heat and probably 500 calories of energy expenditure. More fat, more tea, immediate rewarming. This is the thing about extreme cold that doesn't get emphasized enough in adventure stories. Repairs and maintenance that would be trivial in normal conditions become life-threatening emergencies here. A small gap in your wall? In a temperate climate, you'd notice it, fix it when convenient, no big deal. Here, it can kill you within hours if you don't address it immediately, and addressing it might also kill you if you're not careful. Around noon, though you only know this from the clock, since outside is exactly as dark as it was at midnight, the wind shifts direction and suddenly you're getting smoke blowback. The stove is drafting poorly, smoke is filling the room, and everyone starts coughing. Mikhail has to adjust the smoke hole flap from inside, using a long pole to manipulate the exterior cover without actually going outside. It's a delicate operation. Too much adjustment and snow pours in, too little and you continue choking on smoke. He gets it balanced eventually, the smoke starts drawing properly again, but the experience is a reminder of how many things have to work correctly simultaneously for survival. Fire needs oxygen, but not too much. Smoke needs to escape, but heat needs to stay. Fresh air needs to enter, but cold air needs to stay out. It's a complex system, and any component failing creates cascading problems. Your second crisis comes mid-afternoon when you notice your feet are getting cold despite being inside, wrapped in furs, wearing your full boot system. This shouldn't be happening. You investigate and discover that your boots are wet. Not soaking, but damp. Somehow moisture has accumulated, probably from yesterday's outside excursion combined with inadequate drying time. And damp boots in extreme cold are nearly useless. Water conducts heat far better than air, so wet insulation doesn't insulate. This is genuinely dangerous. Wet boots lead to frostbite. Frostbite leads to tissue damage. Tissue damage in conditions where medical care is unavailable can lead to gangrene and death. Mikhail takes one look at your situation and immediately shifts into emergency mode. The boots come off, you're now in just wool socks, which means your feet are already getting dangerously cold. The boots get disassembled completely, every component separated and positioned around the stove to dry. But here's the problem. Rapid drying damages the leather and can cause it to crack. Too slow and you don't have functional boots for potentially days, during which time any emergency requiring you to go outside would be catastrophic. Mikhail manages a middle path, moderate heat, constant rotation of the boot components, careful monitoring. Takes 6 hours. 6 hours during which you're essentially trapped inside with compromised footwear, unable to respond to any external emergency. This is how people die in extreme environments, not from single catastrophic events usually, but from cascading small failures. Your boots got damp. Normally not a huge problem, but here it compromises your mobility. While you're dealing with that, something else could go wrong. Maybe the roof starts leaking from ice dam formation. Now you're handling 2 problems with reduced capacity. Then maybe someone needs medical attention, or the fire situation becomes critical, and suddenly you're juggling 4 or 5 simultaneous crises with dwindling resources and increasing exhaustion. The psychological toll of crisis management is significant too. You've been on high alert for hours now, constantly scanning for problems, and the stress is exhausting in ways that physical labor isn't. Your shoulders are tight, your jaw is clenched, and you're burning through stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, at rates your body can't sustain indefinitely. Eventually, you'll crash, become sluggish and inattentive, and that's when fatal mistakes happen. Historians document numerous cases of expeditions and settlements where people survived the initial crisis but died in the aftermath because they were too exhausted to maintain vigilance during the recovery period. The blizzard ends, but then someone makes a stupid mistake in their fatigued state, touches metal barehanded, miscalculates their cold exposure time, forgets to check their extremities for frostbite, and that mistake kills them when the actual emergency didn't. Evening brings a new problem. The food storage pit outside is inaccessible. The blizzard has created snow drifts over 2 meters high, and you can't safely navigate to the outdoor storage. This means you're limited to whatever food is currently inside. Maybe 3 days' worth at current consumption rates. 3 days should be fine. Blizzards rarely last longer than that. But rarely isn't never, and you're acutely aware that food scarcity in these conditions spirals quickly into disaster. Without adequate calories, your body can't generate adequate heat. Without adequate heat, you become hypothermic. Hypothermia impairs judgment and motor function. Impaired judgment leads to mistakes. Mistakes lead to death. It's a progression that can unfold over just a couple of days if circumstances align badly. So even though 3 days of food seems adequate, there's an undercurrent of anxiety about what happens if this blizzard is an outlier, if it runs to 4 or 5 or 7 days. Around midnight, you experience your first truly terrifying moment. You wake to a sound like a gunshot and the entire structure shuddering. A tree somewhere outside has exploded from frozen sap expansion. You've heard this before, but this one was close, maybe hitting the roof or a wall. The impact has dislodged something, and now you're hearing wind where you shouldn't be hearing wind. There's a new breach somewhere, and in the darkness and chaos, you can't immediately locate it. Mikhail is up again, lantern in hand, checking every wall section, every roof area, listening for the telltale whistle of wind infiltration. It takes 20 minutes to locate a section of roof where the impact dislodged some of the moss insulation, creating a gap between the roof planks. Not huge, maybe a few centimeters, but enough for wind and snow to enter. And that snow, falling into the warm interior, is melting, creating water which is running down the wall, which will freeze there, creating ice buildup that damages the wall structure. The repair requires accessing the roof from inside, working in the dark, cramped space between the inner ceiling and the outer roof layer, packing fresh moss into the gap while snow and wind blow through. Mikhail does this while you hold the lantern and hand him materials. Takes an hour. An hour of him working in essentially outdoor conditions while technically inside. An hour of heat pouring out through the gap. An hour of everyone else huddled near the stove burning extra wood to compensate. When it's finally done, Mikhail is shaking with cold and exhaustion. More tea, more fat, more passive rewarming near the fire. His fingers are white, first-degree frostbite from working in the gap even with gloves on. Sardana rubs them gently, bringing circulation back, and Mikhail gasps with pain as sensation returns. This is the cost of survival here. Constant minor injuries, constant small sacrifices of tissue and comfort, all to maintain the larger structure that keeps you alive. The blizzard blows itself out sometime around dawn. Again, you only know from the clock, but the wind sound changes, drops from that howling scream to a lower moaning, and eventually to near silence. The silence is almost shocking after hours of wind roar. Your ears ring in the absence of sound. Stepping outside once it's safe to assess damage, you see a transformed landscape. Snow drifts higher than your head in places, the familiar paths completely obscured, everything white and alien and impossibly cold in the post-blizzard stillness. The temperature has dropped. After the blizzard, with clear skies, radiational cooling drives the thermometer down to -73°C. This is the coldest you've experienced, and it's noticeably worse than -70. That 3-degree difference is perceptible, makes your already frozen face ache even more, makes breathing even more painful. You're outside for less than 2 minutes, just long enough to verify that the structure survived intact, and you nearly develop frostbite on your cheeks despite full face coverage. Back inside, you take inventory of the costs. Probably half a day's worth of extra firewood burned. Multiple hours of sleep lost. Everyone exhausted and running on stress hormones. Mikhail with minor frostbite. Your boots still not quite fully dry. Food supplies inside reduced. But everyone alive. Everyone functional. The structure intact. In the brutal accounting of extreme environment survival, this counts as a win. You're learning that survival here isn't about avoiding crises. Crises are inevitable, regular, almost scheduled. It's about managing them, having systems in place, maintaining enough resource margin that you can absorb problems without cascading into catastrophe. It's about staying alert enough to catch problems early, and knowledgeable enough to fix them efficiently, and resilient enough to recover and prepare for the next crisis. Because there will be a next crisis. The blizzard is over, but tomorrow might bring a stove malfunction or a food contamination issue or someone's illness or another structural failure or any of a dozen other things that can go wrong when you're living in extreme conditions with no safety net, no emergency services, no ability to just call for help. You're on your own, and staying alive means constant vigilance, constant maintenance, constant problem solving. You sleep poorly that night despite exhaustion, because your nervous system is still flooded with stress hormones and your mind keeps playing through everything that went wrong and everything that could have gone worse. But you survived. You're still here. The fire still burns. The walls still stand. And tomorrow you'll continue the relentless work of not dying. One crisis at a time, one day at a time until spring. The light, when it finally comes, is almost unbearable. Not because it's too bright. It's barely light at all by normal standards. Just a faint glow on the southern horizon around noon, pale and watery and weak. But after months of near-total darkness, even this anemic excuse for daylight makes your eyes water and your head ache. Your pupils have been dilated for so long, adapted to firelight and darkness, that this first hint of returning sun feels like staring into a searchlight. You have to squint, turn away, let your eyes adjust in stages. It's early March now, and the sun is beginning its slow return. Not that you'd call this spring. The temperature is still -60. The snow is still meters deep, and the landscape remains locked in permafrost. But the progression from total polar night to the faint promise of daylight is psychologically enormous. Your mood lifts noticeably, measurably. Sardana smiles more. Mikhail's constant tension seems to ease slightly. The whole village feels different, more hopeful, as if collective consciousness has decided that survival is now more certain than death. The first full sunrise, when it comes in late March, is a community event. Everyone who can move gathers on the slight hill at the edge of the village, and you all stand there in your furs and layers, watching the horizon. The sun appears as a sliver, then a semicircle, then a full disk, deep orange-red from atmospheric refraction, huge looking from the low angle, impossibly beautiful after months of absence. Someone starts singing, a traditional Yakut song you don't understand but feel in your chest anyway. Others join in. You're crying, and you're not sure if it's from the cold wind or the emotion or both. This sun doesn't provide much warmth. It's too low, too weak, the air too cold. But it provides light, and light provides hope, and hope provides the psychological fuel to endure the remaining weeks of deep cold. Because winter isn't over, not even close. The worst cold often comes in late March and early April, after the sun returns but before the temperature moderates. -75, -80, these aren't uncommon in the transitional period. The sun returns, but the cold doesn't care. Your body has changed in remarkable ways over the winter. You've gained about 8 kilograms, but your body composition has shifted dramatically. Higher body fat percentage for insulation, increased muscle mass in your core and legs from constant shivering and trudging through snow, different fat distribution with more subcutaneous fat for cold protection. Your hands and feet, despite repeated mild frostbite, have developed thicker skin, more resilient to cold exposure. Your face is weathered, aged-looking, marked by the constant assault of extreme cold and wind. Your metabolism has fundamentally recalibrated. You're burning calories at a rate that would be unsustainable anywhere else, but here it's normal. Your body has become a furnace, constantly generating heat, and the fuel requirements are staggering. You eat 5,000 to 6,000 calories daily without gaining weight beyond that initial cold adaptation mass. Your resting heart rate is elevated, your blood pressure runs slightly high, your core temperature is maybe half a degree above normal. All adaptations to help you survive in conditions that shouldn't support human life. Psychologically, you're different too. The person who arrived in January, overwhelmed and terrified by the cold, seems like someone else entirely. You've developed what the Yakut call Kaila's Durba, cold wisdom, the accumulated knowledge of how to survive, but also a psychological hardness, a certain fatalism mixed with competence. You know you can handle the cold now. You've proven it. But you also know how close to the edge you're always operating, how quickly things can go wrong, how thin the margin between life and death really is. The spring thaw, when it begins in April, is brutal in its own way. Temperatures climb being relative, from -60 to -20 to -10 to, occasionally, above freezing during midday. This sounds like relief, but it creates chaos. The snow begins to melt, but the permafrost beneath doesn't, creating a surface layer of mud and slush over rock-hard frozen ground. Every path becomes a hazard. Buildings that sat stable on frozen ground all winter suddenly shift as the surface thaws unevenly. The village transforms into a muddy nightmare. You need different boots now, not cold-weather boots, but waterproof boots to slosh through the ankle-deep mud. The streets, such as they are, become impassable to vehicles. Everything has to be done on foot or with horses, which hate the mud almost as much as you do. And the smell, months of accumulated frozen waste, both human and animal, all thawing at once, releasing odors that were mercifully locked in ice all winter. It's overwhelming, nauseating. The ice on the river breaks up in a spectacular process called ledakad, ice movement. The frozen surface, meters thick, cracks and fragments, and these ice chunks, some the size of cars, begin moving downstream with tremendous force. It's simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. You watch from a safe distance as house-sized ice blocks grind past, occasionally jamming up and creating temporary ice dams, then breaking free with sounds like artillery fire. The river, frozen and passable all winter, becomes an impassable torrent of ice and meltwater. Food dynamics shift dramatically. The outdoor storage pit, frozen solid all winter, starts to thaw. Everything in it needs to be moved to a different storage system or consumed quickly before it spoils. After months of frozen preservation, bacterial action resumes, and meat that was perfectly preserved at -60 begins to rot at -5. Sardana works frantically to process everything, smoking meat, rendering fat, preparing it for storage in forms that don't require freezing. Fresh food becomes available for the first time in months. Early spring plants, shoots and buds and leaves, start appearing in the brief windows when ground surface temperature rises above freezing. These greens are practically medicinal after a winter of pure meat and fat. Your body craves them desperately. That first salad of spring greens and wild onions tastes like the best meal you've ever had, and you eat it with an intensity that surprises you. Your vitamin C levels have probably been borderline scurvy all winter despite the frozen berries and fermented milk, and fresh plants are exactly what your body needs. Historians note that spring was traditionally the most dangerous time of year for Arctic populations, paradoxically more deadly than the deep winter. Food stores were depleted, people were weakened from months of cold stress and marginal nutrition, and the changing conditions created new hazards. drowning in meltwater, injury from shifting ice, illness from spoiled food. Spring killed people who'd survived the worst of winter. The Yakut have a saying, "Winter tests your strength. Spring tests your wisdom." You're starting to understand what survival in Yakutia really means, not just enduring one extreme winter, but adapting to a cycle of extremes. Summer here reaches 20 to 25 Celsius, sometimes higher. That's a temperature range from -75 to +25, 100 degrees Celsius spread, one of the most extreme temperature ranges of any inhabited place on Earth. People here don't just adapt to cold. They adapt to radical temperature variation, developing flexibility and resilience that goes beyond simple cold tolerance. The psychological impact of having survived becomes clear as spring progresses. You've been through something transformative, something that's changed you at a fundamental level. You've lived through conditions that would kill most humans. You've learned skills that most people will never need. You've developed capacities you didn't know were possible. There's pride in that, yes, but also a strange sense of alienation. How do you go back to your previous life after this? How do you care about trivial complaints about minor cold when you've experienced real, life-threatening cold? Mikhail, during one of the long spring evenings, now with actual evening light, sunset colors, the full experience of day-night cycling returning, tells you about his first winter. He was 8 years old, and his family's stove failed during a blizzard. They survived by all sleeping together in the center of the Balagan, wrapped in every fur they owned, keeping a small fire going in a makeshift hearth made from rocks. They burned furniture when wood ran out. His younger sister lost 3 toes to frostbite, but they survived, and that winter taught him everything he needed to know about the margin between life and death here. Every Yakut has a winter like that, he says. A winter that teaches you. After that winter, you know what you can survive. You know what kills. You know to respect the cold, but not fear it. Fear makes you stupid. Respect makes you careful. You nod, understanding. You've had your teaching winter, condensed into a few months. You've learned respect. As May arrives and temperatures stabilize above freezing during the day, though still dropping well below at night, you start preparing to leave. Your time here is ending. You've accomplished what you came for. You've learned to survive at -70. You've drunk the fat and eaten the frozen fish and built the shelter and endured the darkness and managed the crises. You've proven, to yourself if no one else, that it's possible. Humans can live here, not comfortably, not easily, but sustainably with enough knowledge and community support. Your final lesson comes from Sardana, delivered in halting Russian with Mikhail translating the parts she can't express. You came here to learn survival, she says. You learn techniques, yes. How to drink fat, how to build walls, how to not freeze. But the real survival. She taps her chest, then her head. Dot is here and here. Survival is knowing you are small. Knowing the cold is bigger than you. Knowing you cannot defeat it, only negotiate with it. Every day you negotiate. Some days you win, some days you lose. But you keep negotiating. That is survival. You think about this as you pack your few belongings, as you say goodbye to the people who taught you to survive in one of Earth's most hostile environments. You think about the negotiation, the constant trade-offs between comfort and safety, between energy expenditure and energy conservation, between individual need and community obligation. You think about how everything here is a balance, and how quickly imbalance leads to death. The village throws a small farewell gathering, because that's what communities do here. They mark transitions, acknowledge departures, maintain social bonds even as individuals come and go. There's food, actual cooked food, not just frozen shavings, and music, and that sense of shared experience that only comes from surviving difficult things together. You've earned a place in their community, temporary though your membership was. You've proven you can endure. That means something here. As you prepare to leave Yakutia, heading back towards civilization and warmth and all the comforts you've been without for months, you feel a strange reluctance. This place nearly killed you multiple times. It tested you physically, psychologically, socially. It stripped away every comfort and forced you to confront the bare minimum of what you need to stay alive. And yet, there's a purity to that, a clarity. No ambiguity about what matters. Stay warm. Stay fed. Stay connected to your community. Everything else is luxury. You board the small plane that will take you out, looking down at the village as it recedes below. Those small wooden structures on stilts, smoke still rising from chimneys even in the relative warmth of May. The river still choked with ice chunks, the taiga stretching endlessly in every direction. It looks impossibly harsh from up here, impossibly isolated. How do people live there? But you know the answer now. Carefully, communally, with constant vigilance and accumulated wisdom passed down through generations. With respect for the environment and acknowledgement of their own vulnerability. The lessons of Yakutia stay with you as the plane carries you toward warmth. The understanding that survival isn't about strength or dominance but about adaptation and humility. The knowledge that humans can endure almost anything if they're clever enough and supported enough and resilient enough. The experience of living right at the edge of human survivability and discovering that the edge is wider than you thought, that you're capable of more than you believed. You survived -71 Celsius. You drank melted fat to stay conscious. You built shelter from logs and horse dung. You endured the darkness and the cold and the isolation and the constant threat of death. And you lived, not just survived, but in some strange way thrived. You became something new, something adapted, something that understands what the Yakut have always known. The cold is not your enemy. It's your reality, and reality can be negotiated with, lived with, even respected and appreciated, if you have the wisdom and the community and the sheer stubborn will to keep negotiating, one cold day at a time. And now, as your journey through Yakutia draws to a close, let yourself settle more deeply into comfort. The stories of extreme cold fade into memory, replaced by the gentle warmth of your present moment. You've traveled to the edge of human endurance and returned, carrying lessons written in frostbite and firelight. Outside your window, whatever temperature exists feels suddenly manageable, even generous. Your blankets feel warmer knowing what true cold means. Your ability to simply walk to the kitchen without 15 minutes of preparation seems luxurious beyond measure. These small comforts, once taken for granted, now reveal themselves as the profound gifts they are. Let your breathing slow and deepen. Feel the weight of your body sinking into softness. No need to remain vigilant for the next crisis. No need to monitor the fire. No need to calculate caloric expenditure versus intake. You can simply rest, fully and completely, surrendered to warmth and safety and the approaching horizon of sleep. The people of Yakutia continue their endless negotiation with the cold, as they have for centuries, as they will for centuries more. Their resilience stands as testament to human adaptability, their communities built on mutual survival and shared wisdom. And you, having glimpsed their world, can now drift peacefully toward dreams, grateful for warmth, for light, for the simple miracle of comfort. Sleep well, knowing you've survived the unsurvivable, if only in imagination. The cold cannot reach you here. Rest comes easy when you understand how precious it truly is. Close your eyes. Let go. Spring has arrived, the sun has returned, and all is well. Sweet dreams.